Hello and welcome to ATARC's Federal Zero Trust Virtual Summit Day 2. My name is Kirsten Patton, Working Group Program Manager here at ATARC, and I'll be emceeing today's summit. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to thank our partners at AppGate, Beyond Trust, Contrast Security, ForgeRock, Fortinet, ForcePoint, iBoss, Ivanti, Menlo Security, Rubrik, Netscope Palo Alto, Trend Micro, and Vinafi for helping us create today's summit. Additionally, I would like to thank you all at home for joining us today. We hope that you truly enjoy this informative session, and I would like to remind you that after each panel, there will be time for Q&A, so please place all of your questions in the Q&A chat box below. And I also want to remind you to answer the poll questions as we go throughout today. That way you can receive your CPE credit at the end of the session. Up first, I would like to introduce our visionary keynote, the TIC Program Manager and Senior Cybersecurity Architect over at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, Sean Connolly. Sean, over to you.
Hello, hey, Kirsten, thank you so much. Before I begin, I gotta give credit to ATARC. You know, I've been watching yesterday's panels and today's panels, right? Jerry Karen was on yesterday, Andre Mendez, Trifina, of course, from SBA, Steve Hernandez, Eric Mill today, myself, got John Sims, my colleague in arms at CISA, Shane Barney. So there's really a lot of rock stars in these panels. So just congratulations to Tom and everyone at the ATARC team for showing this. So again, my name is Sean Connolly. I am the CISA TIC Program Manager, TIC, Trusted Internet Connections Program. Oh, and we got the slides coming up now. And I'm gonna give a quick discussion on where we are with Zero Trust. Next slide, please. So the agenda for today's call, we're gonna do a quick intro to Zero Trust. I'll talk about CISA's Zero Trust Maturity Model. We'll go through and do a couple of the pillars that we have in the Zero Trust Maturity Model. And then we'll do a little side chat on a couple of the other guidance documents we have coming out, the Cloud Security Technical Reference Architecture, the TRA, and some of the greater Zero Trust efforts going on across the agency. So let's see, something going on with the slides.
I think they were a little too zoomed out at first, so she's just adjusting.
Okay. We'll give it a second here, I understand.
Thank you for your patience.
So you go up to the top there to presenter mode. Does that work or does that not work? Yeah. There we go. Okay, great. Thank you. Let's move to slide number 3. We'll start going in the basics of Zero Trust. So this describes Zero Trust as an evolving set of cybersecurity paradigms that move defenses from static, network-based perimeters to focus on users, assets, and resources. What does that exactly mean? To us at CISA, it means Zero Trust is not about building higher walls. Zero Trust is about designing better gates. We're not constructing more gates, more barriers. We're trying to implement smarter gates. We call those gates policy enforcement points, known in the industry as PEPs. So the traditional security model, we know, focus on the external threats, more specifically, keeping those external threats from crossing organizations' network boundary. Although the traditional security systems have multiple detection systems, those systems typically are not integrated. And once an asset's inside the network, that asset, that user, that resource is considered trusted. Key word there, trust. That's where Zero Trust differs. Zero Trust still acknowledges the importance of perimeter security, but also focuses on those same users and assets inside the network by continually assessing sessions, verifying credentials, and granting access. So let's move to the next slide, please. We do a lot of talks on Zero Trust, and some of them are more Zero Trust one-on-one talks. Some of them are much more deep dive architectural or some of the components. One thing that's interesting is coming out of the recent headlines or the different text is just the relevance or the acknowledgement of Zero Trust at the C-suite. There's been recent articles in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, all talking about zero trust. And we haven't seen these types of discussions about these architectures in earlier times. So I think it's just interesting how the zero trust in particular is resonating in C-suite where maybe earlier architecture discussions didn't. Next slide, please. So again, we do a lot of zero trust 101s, and this is where we start a lot of our talks. I recognize some of the audience here has deep experience in zero trust, but recognizing there may be some that are new. Just wanted to give an analogy. One we commonly do on zero trust at a ballpark. Imagine you're a baseball fan and you're in a stadium for a game, baseball game. Stadium security followed protocols like they do in the traditional network perimeter security. We'd only have to show our baseball ticket once at the gate, and then we can go anywhere we want inside the ballpark. We could go to our assigned seat with the ticket. We could also start running the bases with the players. We could go to the announcer's booth, start calling the game. We could do this because there's an implicit trust built into the system itself, into the stadium, that implicitly believes that I'll go only where my ticket says I will go. But in reality, I have the ability to move freely within the stadium. If I become a threat in this prior model, there's no way to really have an integrated security system stop me from moving around. Next slide, please. So what happens when we go to the zero trust ballpark? So in zero trust stadium, it's much different. We still show the ticket at the beginning of the ticket gate, but we also have places where we need to show the same ticket again or other credentials. I may need to show my ticket a second time at the usher, be escorted to my seat. I may need to show my driver's license, which is a separate credential to purchase something. If I'm employed at the stadium, maybe at the end of the stadium through an employee's gate, a separate avenue, much like we have privileged access in computer systems. If I'm a baseball player, again, a different separate credential. And I have to enter through a different way, player's parking lot. Same time, zero trust stadium employs guards, sensors, officers on the field, security cameras. All these mechanisms are integrated in a new way, in a way it wasn't before in the old stadium, in the old architectures. So zero trust is much more about the integrated, modernized IT environment. Next slide, please. So the analogy, how does that work in today's architectures? So on the left side, we have that traditional, we call it the tick 1, tick 2, or more outside the federal environment, we call it castle and moat architecture philosophy. All the resources you see there, agency headquarters, branch office, data centers, remote officers, remote users, sorry. All those are protected at the top of that in the architecture. Top of that diagram, we have what's called a traditional tick, not the most flexible of architectures. That's with enterprise firewalls, web proxies, detection sensors, and other boundary mechanisms are placed. That middle diagram shows those same resources are protected by segmenting the resource into smaller, more granular trust zones. Now we're able to position the security closer to the resources themselves, instead of aggregating the traffic and the security at one access point. These zones can be protected by PEPs. They're more tailored and focused on the resources that require protection. On the right side, we would see a zero trust environment. You see that zero trust has identity connecting everything. Identity is becoming that new fabric that binds everything together. Identity is now becoming the network. Next slide, please. So now I want to discuss for a few minutes the zero trust maturity model that we released over the summer. The maturity model was released as a courtesy to agencies to help them as they were required to submit to OMB zero trust implementation plans. And we were hearing from agencies they need help in what to build out for their plans. So we released this maturity model as one of many roads or many paths, that agencies can take as they build out their zero trust architectures and plans. Next slide, please. You see here, we call it the Greek temple with 5 different pillars: identity, device, network, application, data. You can see these cross-cutting capabilities at the bottom: visibility and analytics, automation, orchestration, governance. These all work across all those different pillars. And to be fair to Steve Hernandez, ACT, and some others, this is nothing new, this pillar in the Greek temple. But this is really, I think, when we talk to different stakeholders about zero trust, where we all sort of gravitate to these different pillars themselves and these capabilities that cross-cut each of these. Next slide, I'll go through a couple of the pillars themselves and explain how these relate to each other. So this matrix you see on the right This is what we call the macro view. This is how the pillars relate to each other. And you can also see we have 3 different modes. We have traditional for each of the pillars, advanced for each of the pillars, and then optimal. And those explain what we mean in those architectures for each of those, whether it's traditional for identity, if an agency has more advanced solutions in the device, or optimal solutions, maybe in the network or data. These are how agents are to gauge where they are in their maturity model. Next slide, please. So now we'll do a quick deep dive into 2 of those pillars. Identity, I mentioned that before in one of the slides. Primary focus was zero trust. Here's different functions in the identity pillar: authentication, the identity stores, and the risk assessment. And for each of these different functions, then we talk about what does it mean to have a traditional authentication mechanisms? What does it mean to have advanced identity stores? And when we talk about traditional, typically more manual configurations and manual assignments of attributes, static security policies that are isolated. We talk more optimal, more toward starting to show cross-pillar coordination, reflects better centralized visibility and policy enforcements. And we talk to the optimal, we are saying we are fully automated assignment of attributes, dynamic policies, they observe triggers. So we'll go one more slide here. I think this is the network pillar, the next one. And same thing, we have the same layout in terms of traditional, advanced, and optimal. With network pillars, with the network pillar, it really comes down to talking about segmentation different ways. That's what we consider the primary function. And then how to incorporate threat protections and encryption are 2 of the other key ones for network. And to be fair, each of these pillars is a 20+ year industry. And it's really hard to distill these industries down to just a few different functions. But I think these capture the high level when we talk to the agencies and talk to the greater community of what they see for each of these different pillars, the primary functions. Next slide, please. So I want to talk real quick. We mentioned the identity pillar, but we cannot lean on the identity pillar by itself. Well, what you see here is the Saml process. Saml stands for Security Assertion Markup Language, and this is just a known good solution in terms of how an agency or how a device can talk to something else. With the Saml, you can see the process here: steps 1, step 2. Machine talks to the service provider, wants access. Step 3, step 4. Machine goes to the authentication store, receives or observed credentials or the approved tokens. Step 5, the machine forward those to provider and gains access. And one more slide here. What we saw on SolarWinds, and again, this is all open source, is where the adversary is able to take over the authentication server. And so when the adversary tried to gain the service from the service provider, since the adversary had the tokens, they were able to use those tokens, those forged tokens, to access the service provider. And so again, this is just one way where we cannot lean on the identity pillar by itself, but we recognize the primary importance of the identity pillar. Next slide, please. And one service I'd just like to make everyone aware that CISA will be rolling out next year, Protective DNS Service. It's an evolution of what we had prior Einstein 3A DNS service, but the new service will give us many benefits, including enhanced incident detection response, integrated DNS solution, more scalable and resilient, and provide at no cost to agencies. Next slide, please. At the same time, key discussion we at CISA are having with the agencies and with the vendor community is, what does this mean for situational awareness? CISA has that primary mission, have that persistent situational awareness, the ability to maintain panoramic visibility across the federal enterprise. As we move towards zero trust, as we move towards segmentation, isolation, encryption, what does that mean towards situational awareness, both for the agency, for their awareness, and then for CISA in our role also. So each of these steps you see here: collection, analysis, prioritization, resolution. Each of these we need to discuss with the community how that will be, how zero trust will impact these. Next slide, please. I'm going to wrap up here with a rapid round with just a couple of the documents coming out. Cloud security, technical reference architecture. We had a task here to release this in coordination with both OMB, USDS, and FedRAMP. So in September, we released the first version of this for request for comment. Next slide, please. And TRA is divided into 3 different sections. We work with FedRAMP on the shared services, USDS on cloud migration, and we at CISA wrote the cloud security posture management section. Next slide, please. And these these documents, we've had this question a couple of times to us. How do these documents complement each other? How do they differ? Really, the cloud security is focused simply on the cloud migration and data protections. Zero Trust maturity model includes the cloud, but that includes both branch office, data centers. It's more holistic, if you will, comprehensive architecture solution itself. Next slide, please. And we'd be negligent if we didn't talk about the federal Zero Trust strategy coming out OMB. Of course, Eric was on the call yesterday. All those bullets you see there: strong identity practices, realize encryption and application testing, recognizing the inventory of every device, supporting intelligent automation, and enable safe and robust use of cloud services. Those are all things we've talked about in our talk here. Support back to OMB efforts for Zero Trust. Next slide, please. And just a couple others, just to make everyone aware. We have the EO that we talked about, NIST, of course, the wealth of documents coming out. 800-207 started all of this. Zero Trust architectures. NSA, through Kevin Binghamshop, is releasing a number of documents embracing Zero Trust security model. Next slide, please. Then NIST also has their white paper, Planning for Zero Trust Architectures. GSA has a number of documents also, their buyer guide they released, and through EIS, a Zero Trust architecture document. So that's it for me. Thank you, everyone. That closes me out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. We always appreciate you coming to these events and sharing with us. Up next, we have our first emerging technology talk for the day, and this time we will be hearing from Peter Newton. Peter is the Senior Director of Products and Solutions over at Fortinet. Peter, over to you.
Thank you. And by the way, that was a great talk by Sean. I do talk about Zero Trust a lot, and so it's great to see someone else talk about it so intelligently, but put together quite nicely. So let me share some slides that I've put together here. Where are my slides? Not it. There we go. There we go. So I want to talk about one element of Zero Trust. Sean laid out a really good overview of what Zero Trust is and how it's an integrated solution that ties in the various elements, network identity, encryption, et cetera. So what I'm going to talk about is the specific application of Zero Trust to the issue of connecting users to the applications. By intro myself, I've been at Fortinet about 4 years, but I've been in the computer industry for more than 20 plus years. So this is a neat, really cool evolution of how we can enable users to access applications securely, no matter where those users happen to be located, and even in fact where those applications are even hosted. So let's take a look at what we got here. Now, there are a couple of drivers that interest people in Zero Trust, because ZTNA can do a whole lot of different things. ZTNA, for many folks, is a key technology as those organizations look to support their employees working from anywhere. The ability to enable them, as I said at the top, to access those applications, whether they're working in their main office location, whether they're working in their home location, or even when they're traveling, to give that same level of control and security to connect them to those applications, no matter where they are. However, ZTNA is also useful in supporting the cloud journey as organizations are shifting applications from being hosted on-premise to the cloud. ZTNA can assist with that because as a part of the benefits of ZTNA, you're abstracting where those applications are located, which makes it easy to then, of course, move those applications. And finally, ZTNA can reduce the risk profile, and therefore a lot of organizations are looking at ZTNA as a way to enhance their security and reduce that attack surface. Talk a little bit more about each of these. When we look at ZTNA, what it does is it presents a common way to access applications for users, i.e. the same way, whether they're in the office or out of the office. As Sean mentioned, Zero Trust is taking away that implicit trust of trusting you based on where you are, i.e. you used your ticket to get into the ballpark. ZTNA says, hey, we're going to have this same experience, whether you're in the office, whether you're traveling, we're going to make you show the same ticket, go through the same process. But one nice benefit of ZTNA is we do the same thing, whether you're in the office or when you're remote. We're going to create a secure encrypted tunnel, even when you're in headquarters. But of course, when you're in Starbucks, or when you're in the airport, when you're at home, we're going to create that encrypted tunnel when you go to access an application. Single sign-on is supported. And from an employee standpoint, when they're working from these locations, with ZTNA, they don't need to know where that application is necessarily hosted. They don't need to fire up a VPN to a specific instance or VPN concentrator. They simply go about their business the way they would expect to. They just launch the application. From an administrative standpoint, because of the access proxy in the ZTNA architecture, the applications can be located anywhere, which means that from an administrative standpoint, you can shift applications from being on-premise to a private cloud, to a public cloud, and still control granular access to those applications using bulk provisioning capabilities. And then with respect to the attack surface, the process of ZTNA includes strong authentication. So we're able to use multi-factor authentication. We're able to use, we're checking that identity for each connection. We're checking the device that the user is using, whether laptop or mobile phone, on each session. So, user comes in the morning, fires up, an application. The ZTNA process starts off. They're going to get identified, authenticated as a user. Their device is going to get identified and posture checked to make sure that it's, got the right appropriate posture to access that application. The antivirus is turned on. The firmware on the device is up to the organization's policy. No vulnerable event has happened. Anyway, that is going to get, those checks are going to happen when that person accesses that application. Person shuts down the application, goes to a meeting, comes back to their desk, an hour later, launch the application. They're going to go through all those same verifications and authentications again. So every session we're checking that ongoing verification. So it's not just once you show your ticket when you first get to the ballpark. You're having to show your ticket throughout the day, whenever you're launching each application. Because that user, if he launches another application, has two going, he's going to go through another identity and posture check to make sure that he's appropriately or she is appropriately configured and safe to access that application. And then also introducing the attack surface, because of the proxy nature of ZTNA, all those applications are hidden from the internet. So administrators no longer need to expose those applications to the internet. Those applications are only expecting connections from the access proxy points. So this makes it more difficult for hackers to scan the internet to find these applications. They're literally having to hack their way through an access point to get to that application. So it makes the security of those applications much stronger, overall reducing that risk surface. So what is the architecture of ZTNA? With Fortinet, we have a very flexible architecture. There are, I guess, two basic approaches to ZTNA out there. There's a client-initiated version and a service-initiated version. This version is the client-initiated version. It relies on an agent sitting on the device so that wherever the user is, if they're in the campus or at home, they're going to have their laptop. There's an agent running on it. And that agent, it will connect to an access proxy. The access proxy will then go through those authentications and verifications, identity and posture checks. And only once the user has passed all of those checks, the access proxy then connects them securely to that application, wherever that application is. Now with Fortinet's solution, I've noted that the access proxy is hosted in FortiOS. FOS is short for FortiOS. That's the operating system we run on our firewalls. In an actual instance, what this means is that access proxies can be located in many locations. They can be located on-premise in one of our hardware appliances. They can be located in a cloud using one of our VM virtual machines, or it could be in one of our SASE services, POPs, where we host that FortiOS as a service. And through that, all of that is managed through our FortiClient Central Management System to enable all of this to work together. So to kind of show you what that looks like in practice, when a user goes to or starts or is transitioned over to using ZTNA, they'll have the agent running on their device. The agent we use is FortiClient. FortiClient is also our VPN agent. So, most people now, if you're using remote connectivity, you're using a VPN. So people are shifting from VPN to ZTNA. So here we have someone who has their VPN client loaded on their device, and the administrator is now transitioning them over to starting to use ZTNA. Well, our FortiClient agent, it's talking back to the central management about once a minute, just to make sure that it's reporting in on a telemetry, kind of a keep alive heartbeat, so that as a part of its being a VPN agent, part of its being our security fabric agent, it's connecting back to the central management on a regular basis. When ZTNA gets turned on, when it makes that connection, the central management is now going to push down a ZTNA digital certificate to that device to provide a means of identifying that device. It's then also going to tell the device where all the ZTNA access proxies are located and where it should connect to, depending on where that device is located. The central management will then go out and talk to the various access proxy points saying, hey, these are the various devices that are going to be using ZTNA, and it gives a copy of that digital certificate. Also at this point, the various proxy points would be configured so that the various user types would get their allocations, in the sense that say your sales folks would get access to sales applications, and that configuration would happen now. Your R&D folks would get access to R&D applications, and that way the access proxies can enforce that when it authenticate a user, they can then check to make sure, oh, should this user, based on their role, have access to this application. Now, when that user, wherever they are, when they go to launch an application that they want to work on, a secure encrypted tunnel will be created to an access proxy point. The various checks will take place. They'll be authenticated. The device will be ID'd and postured. They'll check to make sure that the device ID matches the user ID. And once all those verifications have taken place, then the user is connected to the application, no matter where that application is located. So to deploy Fortinet's ZTNA model, the key elements that are necessary are something running that access proxy. In most cases, that's a 48 running our FortiOS 7.x. And then we also need the agent. So that, in our case, is the FortiClient, also running a 7.x code. There is an authentication that's necessary. We do offer that through our FortiAuthenticator and FortiToken, but we also support third-party applications as well. So some of the ways that this ZTNA approach is different than others is we are supporting both on-premise access proxies as well as cloud-based access proxies. Most ZTNA offerings out there are cloud only, which makes it more challenging for hosting on-premise devices or on-premise applications for users that are in a campus location. They work well for someone who's traveling and remote. They can go through the cloud and it all works nicely. With our solution, it really enables ZTNA to be deployed everywhere for every employee at all times. So that's really what you want. You do want that always on, always verifying capability. Now ours is being deployed in our 48s. Our 48s, that means the traffic is getting a full stack security inspection. And you can also leverage the other capabilities of our 48s, including SD-WAN capabilities and SD branch capabilities. Also, because our solution has the ZTNA agent as a part of our VPN agent, it makes it very easy for the transition to ZTNA from a VPN architecture. And importantly, this is not a licensed feature. This is simply a new capability that's enabled on our firewalls and in our VPN agents. So ZTNA, one way to think about it is really bringing zero trust principles to to remote access. Traditionally, that's been done with VPN, but now we're applying those principles of zero trust, of ongoing verification, of very granular control, and we're actually, at the same time we're increasing and improving the security, we're also delivering a better user experience because users are now going through the same process no matter where they are. So that concludes my discussion of ZTNA. It is an exciting new technology. This looks to be absolutely the future of how organizations are going to enable users to connect to applications. And so I appreciate your time here to learn a little bit about it with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was great. Up next, we have our panel discussion. So if our first panelist for the day could please come on camera and you can unmute yourselves. I would like each of you to introduce yourself, but first I just want to remind the audience to please submit questions of your own in the Q&A chat of this platform, and also answer the CPE credits if you would like to be eligible for that. And we'll go ahead and do some introductions. Jerry, you're up first.
Good morning. My name is Gerald Karen. I am the CIO here at the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of the Inspector General. And I am also the co-chair for the ATARC Zero Trust Working Group as well.
Excellent. And then Deidre.
Good morning. I think it's still morning here. Yes, I'm Deidre Bass. I am the deputy CISO for the Defense Intelligence Agency and also the deputy chief for the Cyber and Security Division.
Excellent. And do we have our other panelist, Josh, on, maybe under a different name right now? If not, that's okay. All right, well, maybe Josh will show up momentarily. So we'll go ahead and dive into our questions, but first let's go ahead and pop up our first poll question actually for the audience. So poll number 1, please. I'll go ahead and read it. It should be up momentarily. Where does privileged access management, there it is. Where does privileged access management rank on your list of identity-centric security priorities? So let's pull our audience on that. The options include privileged access management as a top priority. You're currently researching PAM tools to implement. It's an area of focus, but other projects are taking priority right now, or not a priority. So if our audience could please take a moment to respond to that poll, and we'll just dive right into it. Jerry, my first question, I'll turn it over to you, is how does identity and privileged access management align with zero trust? So could you at a high level do your best to kind of break that down for us to better understand what this has to do with zero trust in the first place?
Probably not.
You're fast.
It is definitely, and we just heard Sean earlier, you know, it's definitely a primary pillar of zero trust. It's very important. It's not all. Some people dive down into identity, but it's not all of zero trust. There's very many other layers, but it's utterly important piece of zero trust. The object is, if it's zero trust, is we're trying to protect data, and I'm sure, you know, in DoD they'll say other, but you know, in the general terms, let's just say the main emphasis is to protect data. And however, as a CIO, I also have to support the mission. So one of the things we need to be able to do is get the right data to the right people at the right time. What is that about? That's about identity. So definitely understanding what your different user profiles or personas that you have. You have the general users, you have, you know, public users, and then you have your privileged users. Your privileged users, your administrators, those people that have access keys to the kingdom because they're managing things. So definitely, you know, adversaries or people like that, you know, those are the types of accounts that the bad guys want, because once they can get those, then they kind of get the keys to the kingdom aspect. So I'm a big believer when it comes to identity. Like I said, right people, right access to the right people, right data for the right people at the right time. So in doing that is, you know, with privileged accounts, not having to be perpetually an admin. Like like just like using classified data, for example. What do? You don't leave it on your desk when you go home for the day. What do you do when you don't need it? You put it in the vault. So it's not available until you need it. So we've in the past have made admins perpetual, just by the result of being part of a group, and that group delegates them access. Well, if they're not using it, pull them out, put them in the vault, and put them away. So identity for privileged access management is very important, and identity as a whole is very important. Like I said, right data to the right people at the right time, being very judicious about it. And least privilege, of course, we've all known about least privilege for years, so that's nothing new.
Well, thank you. Thank you for breaking that down for us. And we'll have Josh introduce himself in just a moment. I see he just joined us. Hi, Josh. But Deidre, did you have anything that you would like to add to that question and response?
No, absolutely, absolutely. And just Jerry, completely lockstep and barrel with you on that. DoD very much making a priority with access to the data and prioritization of identity as well. Because at the end of the day, the multiple pillars of Zero Trust, they all cross identity and data. Getting the right people, the right access, to the right data, making sure that we protect that, the different pillars, being users, being devices, network, applications, analytics, all of that deals with that identity and access. Because again, you got to verify who a person is with the authentication piece, and then the authorization piece, what they can access. Totally in agreement with that. And when you're talking about that privilege access, again, like Jerry was saying, you don't have to use that privilege access for everything. Something can be done as a basic user. Again, if those accesses are compromised, then that nefarious character could have access to the keys of the kingdom. And that's one of the big issues, not issue, but concerns within DoD. I see specifically as like insider threats. So really, identity is priority.
Thank you, Deidre. And Josh, we were just touching on how identity and privilege access management aligns with Zero Trust. But first, I'd love if you could introduce yourself to the audience as well.
Awesome, thank you. I am so sorry for the couple of minutes I was late. Of course, as in all things with Murphy's Law, my internet went down right as this panel was supposed to start, and that was perfect. My name is Josh Broadbent. I am the Senior Security Director for Public Sector at Beyond Trust. Apparently I know a thing or two about identity and privilege management from what I've been told. So they asked me to come on here and talk. I promise it's not because I love the sound of my own voice. So I would love to jump right in where we are, because this is obviously something I'm passionate about, right? As we take a look at the concept of identity management and privilege management and where they intersect, I've been very fond lately of the concept of honestly a zoo, because those of us who have to deal with end users and even end user admins know that it's like herding cats sometimes, right? So we don't build a zoo and put the animals in and then put cages in, right? Well, it's not how it works. Otherwise things eat things and it's no fun. When you talk about privilege management, it's about making sure that we build the cages first. It's about making sure that we know where everything goes and when their feeding time is and how everything gets organized. Because we don't have that when we talk about identity management. You get these roles that are perpetually assigned, like Jerry was talking about earlier. And when those roles are perpetually assigned, people get this access, and sometimes it even becomes incidental. I've used the example several times on panels that I was once doing some work for a state agency. They called me, they were talking about privilege management, and they said that they had 270 admins and like 260 of them were Active Directory admins, full admins in their Active Directory. Because every time somebody needed a little more access, they just made them a domain admin. And that's kept perpetually happening. And exactly, Deidre, that was kind of my thought. I had to put myself on mute for a second on the call. But overall, it's the same thought. That's what happens when we don't have privilege management and privilege access integrating with identity management. So that's kind of where I am on that.
Thank you, Josh. So then next, let's talk about best practices. And I know we're not going to be able to get into all of them with the time we have, but if you had to name one best practice, we'll go through everyone name one that can help agencies minimize their attack surface and cyber risk. What are some of the different things that agencies should be focusing on when it comes to the attack surface and the cyber risk? We'll start with Jerry again, please.
Geez, there's so many and you just want one. Oh my God. First of all, least privilege, right? Don't give more than what is needed. But we have experience and have seen bad cyber hygiene over the years. So you give, the rights to somebody and, they can do more. But we really got to narrow in on least privilege. I think one of the other things that I'm looking forward to as we go on our zero trust journey that I'd really like to see is ongoing authentication and ongoing access checking. Not a one-time linear event. We kind of do it in a one-time linear event. It's got to be an ongoing process. I think we have to not type in your password every 5 seconds or something, but we got to keep checking. We got to keep checking. We got to keep checking. It's going to be an ongoing process. So looking at that and not just being that linear event is very important, I think, going in the future.
And Deidre, what would you add on as a best practice?
Really getting good cyber hygiene. That's super basic, but a lot of organizations still struggle with basic cyber hygienes. For us really to get zero trust matured and further down the journey and process, there's gonna have to be a lot of processes that we're gonna have to get better at. Patching, vulnerability management, end of life hardware and software, making sure encryption, data at rest, data in transit. Encryption is definitely gonna be key. So just really getting good at the basics seriously is going to position us to be better and in a better place going forward.
Josh, what would you say is a best practice that may oftentimes be overlooked?
Discovery. Honestly, you don't know what you don't know. So you have to know where your privileged accounts are. You have to know who has access to those privileged accounts. You have to know what you define as a privileged account. What do they have access to? So really understanding how you're going to set up that box to begin with is so critically important, and honestly something that gets left behind. People jump into these projects and they end up with a whole lot more privileged accounts, or those privileged accounts interacting with more software than they understand. So I think discovery is definitely a best practice here.
Thank you all for those insights. Jerry, how can you begin to build an effective zero trust approach with an emphasis on identity and privileged access management? Where would you advise folks to simply just start?
I think Josh picked the perfect place right there is discover, know what you have. You got to know what you have and then understand what those people have access to, or what abilities that they have, and walk that back, because normally we can't do a greenfield. We'd all love to do a greenfield and let's clean the slate and start over. But we can't do that. One of the things too is, is it a decentralized model or your centralized model? There's some decisions on how you're managing your enterprises and things, and what you're delegating out or downstream, and making sure you are delegating that least privilege. But I think Josh hit it, is you really got to understand, what are your users? What types of users do you have? Privileged users, what are they managing? Do they really need that? Putting some kind of guardrails on them as best you can, because sometimes those privileged users have a lot more power than what they need. And how can you make sure that they're not doing the buddy system? Because Deidre mentioned and I mentioned bad admin hygiene. The buddy system. Oh, Deidre, oh, you need rights to do that, Deidre? Oh, here you go. And off you go. Now she's got those for perpetuality and able to do things. So how do we walk some of these things back? But I think Josh hit it: discovery, and then understanding what your users are as you do that discovery.
Excellent. Well, Deidre, maybe you can help walk us through that journey too then. So once you do the discovery, you understand what you have, you begin the delegation process. What do you think that you should do next?
And just real quick, even before that, definitely discovery is key because you got to know what you have before you know what to protect. But also even before that, that education, that advocacy, letting your key stakeholders across the board understand and know that Zero Trust is going to cut across all areas. And in doing that, you really got to change the paradigm in that thought process to know this is not a cybersecurity thing. This is not just a cybersecurity thing. It's not just an IT thing. It's not just one tool that we can go out there and purchase. So really understanding and educating the key stakeholders on that process. But as far as that journey goes, regarding the identification and access, we have pieces and parts of that in place already with regard to like identity credentialing, access management, doing that identity with PKI, with different access RSA tokens, different things that we use for identity and access. We've got to get better at it. We've got the different pieces and parts in place, but really identifying and finding where your gaps are. Laying out what you're doing, but being key and zeroing in on what those gaps are and what needs to be put in place going forward.
And Josh, do you have any other additional insights in terms of building that effective zero trust approach that you'd like to add?
Yeah, so as Jerry and Deidre have kind of walked through what we talked about, we talked about discovery, we talked about knowing who you have. As you continue down that, it's also important to understand that there are a lot of situations where there are tools that exist to not require admin privileges in places that previously required it. So as we talk about zero trust, having tools in place that can elevate applications instead of users so that you have less of an attack surface is certainly important.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Jeff.
I just want to add something to that. Where we can automate, humans usually make the mistakes, and that's what causes outages and operational issues sometimes. So definitely automate where you can, because you get standardization after you automate. One of the other things I wanted to add, I think what's important also with discovery is when you discover all the accounts, a lot of people have multiple accounts because we have a proliferation with cloud. So we have a proliferation of digital identities. We're only one human being. So make sure that we can tie it all back to one human is very important because we are only one human. So we should be able to establish an authoritative identity that ties back to that human.
We have an audience question that just came in, so any of our panelists feel free to jump in and answer this. But do you have any ideas as to an executable process to add the zero trust architecture required tags to legacy data, objects, files, such as data stored in agencies' SharePoint infrastructure?
So I'll go first on that one. Really, when it comes to understanding data and understanding what's there and being able to tag that, an identity governance solution is key there. One that can read those, call them blobs of data, the unstructured data that you end up with in SharePoint file stores, all of those things. One that can actually define those, maybe automatically detect PII or sensitive information, and be able to tag those with specific roles is a fantastic place to start for some of that legacy data.
And also knowing that some of the legacy data is not going to be able to be tagged. So really going through, doing that kind of scrub, that parsing, and really getting into the discipline of tagging the user, tagging the data. That way you can trust those tags to allow that sufficient access to the data. That's going to be key. Supporting going forward, it is really, we know no new money's coming, at least not in government. Don't know about private sector, but no new money's coming. So you're gonna have to make those hard decisions as far as what you're gonna invest in and what you're gonna have to stop investing in. And it's gonna be some hard decisions You're not going to be able to do everything, things that don't get you in that direction going towards zero trust, the APIs, that's not going to be interoperable. Some things are going to have to be divested in to get us along the right path. And like I said, so we don't find ourselves later in a place where we can't do the tagging. Some stuff is just too legacy that we're not going to be able to do that type of tagging. But what we can, doing that scrubbing, going through, tagging the data, tagging the users to allow the sufficient access.
Another question for the panel came through. Where do you cross the line between personal privacy while also using bring your own device and organizational security? Or do you recommend organizations provide work devices for their workforce?
So I can start with this one. I'm an advocate of BYOD because we find that a lot of users, they only need access to mail, calendar, some files and things like that. So they can usually do a lot just with that. So there's other personas though that they may need a fully managed device because they need full access and things like that. However, a lot of people think with BYOD that we're controlling the whole device. And no, that's not necessarily true. We can do, instead of doing managed device, we can do managed application so that when you register your account and say with your email, let's say, I'll just use Outlook, for example, you download the Outlook from the Google Play Store. I'm an Android person. I'm not Team iPhone. So I downloaded Outlook from the Google Store. I saw that, DJ. You must be an iPhone person. I register my account and then it sends me to my federation, and so I get my token and things like that. But once I do that registration, I am now managing the application. The organization is managing the application only through policy. Now, the only telemetry I can see from a management standpoint is model, because there's some models that we don't want on government networks built by certain manufacturers and from certain countries, and as well as if Kirsten is a few iOS's behind because she hasn't been personally updating, I can block based off that, no, you can't come on my network or access your things until you bring it up to that, or you don't have that model. But I cannot manage your device as a whole. I can wipe that application, but I'm only managing the application through policy. So there's that option. I think a lot of people overlook that option. Some organizations, I know, some private businesses, you can use your personal device on the network, but you are registering your device to be managed by that organization. There's managed application also, which is definitely something that can be used.
Excellent, thank you. We'll go ahead and pop up our second poll question, and that will read, in your opinion, how important is zero trust to agencies achieving ICAM cybersecurity goals? We should have that pull up here any second now. There you go. So please rank the importance. And with that, we have another question having to do with this poll. How does zero trust help agencies achieve their ICAM cybersecurity goals? So Deidre, maybe you could help respond to this one. What does ICAM security have to do with zero trust?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So as far as ICAM goes, that ranks top priority, because again, ICAM, identity, credentialing, access, that deals that definitely with the identity and the access portion to the data. So zero trust really helps bring together a lot of the pieces and parts that we've been trying to get going for quite a long time. So it's extremely important achieving those ICAM goals. And like I said, we have capabilities in place, but we have gaps, but it's definitely a primary goal. And one of the kind of, if you will, along that maturity model, I would even say one of those zero trust or foundational zero trust pieces that we got to have in place. Extremely important.
Excellent. Looks like most of the audience agrees with you on that too. They ranked it pretty high on the importance.
I tried to get credit for those CPE questions, but panelists cannot participate.
Oh no, we need to change that setting. Josh or Jerry, did you want to add any additional insights into that before we move on?
Yeah, I'll add just a brief part of that. I mean, I think that ICAM obviously has to be very high up on zero trust strategy. And the thing that I can't leave one of these panels without saying is that zero trust is a strategy and not a product. Because so many, I did a show in person finally a couple of weeks ago, and literally almost every vendor booth had zero trust something up on the booth. I don't really know how infrastructure wiring makes zero trust, but you know, hey, it's the buzzword right now. And through that, you begin to realize that people are going to market, hey, here's your zero trust thing. And the truth is that's a direction we head from a security perspective, and ICAM is a huge part of that. But there's a lot more that goes into it.
Excellent, thank you. Jerry, did you want to add anything?
I don't know if there's much to add after following these two. They pretty much covered it, but yeah, I mean, you hit it right on the head there. So I'm not gonna belabor it.
Well, then we'll have you kick us off with our takeaways as we close out this panel discussion. What's one thing, if our audience could leave, you really want to hammer it home that you want them to learn and take away from this panel discussion? Please share that with us now.
Identity is absolutely important. All aspects of identity, including the privilege accounts and privilege management, is very, very important, but it is not all of zero trust. But it is very much a solid pillar that most people need to mature on, I believe. I've seen proliferation of digital identities and things like that. And it's like, I think Josh said, you know, the zoo and the herding of cats in some organizations. So definitely it is very important to pay attention. Some people it's a starting point, which is perfectly fine. But please remember that it is not all of zero trust.
Excellent, thank you. And Deidre, what is it that you would like to leave our audience with?
Can't unmute myself. I guess if I would have to just repeat what I said from a perspective of, is not just zero trust. It is not just a security thing. It's not just an IT thing. It's really a paradigm shift. Is a shift in the way we do things. But again, at the end of the day, it's about protecting the data. It's about protecting the people and getting the right people to the right data at the right time so they can accomplish their mission.
Thank you, Deidre. And then Josh, we'll end with you.
Yeah, so I guess I'm also going to kind of go back to where I started. You don't know what you don't know. And that is so important when you're talking about this concept of zero trust and privileged access. You have to know what's in your environment. You have to know what has privilege. And if you don't start there, you're kind of trying to start the race way off the starting block. So you have to go back and figure out what you have and make a plan for it.
Excellent. Thank you all for your insights. Always a pleasure, and we hope to have you back on more panel discussions. I see there is another audience question that came through, so if you want to take a moment to type out that answer to them, you're welcome to stay on here and also continue watching the summit from here. But otherwise, we're going to go ahead and get our second tech talk of the day booted up here, and we will be hearing this time from Dave Abramowitz. Dave is the federal technical lead over at Trend Micro. So Dave, the floor is all yours.
Okay, here I am. All right, let me just share the slides. Okay, are we good?
Looks great.
Fantastic. So hello everyone, David Abramowitz with Trend Micro as introduced. 15 minutes is not a lot of time, so we're going to get going. I thought it might be useful to just take a step back from what is typically being talked about and presented around zero trust and talk about XDR because I think it is an important, very critical component in getting visibility to all of the data. I heard you don't know what you don't know, and that's very true. And so getting that information from a number of different sensors and sources throughout the environment is going to be critical to feeding the information that we'll need to make good zero trust decisions. So just taking a step back, I'm not going to spend much time at all on this slide. I'll come back to it later, so just a bookmark here. XDR, as we define it, is extended detection and response. So it's beyond the endpoint. Get into that in just a sec. But the point here is to detect more, having the ability to correlate all the information that we're seeing, to visualize the full attack story, what is going on throughout the entire environment, and to be able to confidently respond and remediate. And that's based on gathering the data from all those points below. So just for a second to talk about visibility. This is the key, right? Because there are so many different solutions individually doing their own thing and having their own management consoles, and it's a bear to get at the real data and what is it that I need to worry about right now. So not only with threats, but when we talk about zero trust risk insights, what is it where are my vulnerable people? Where are my machines that are having issues? Where are the attempts at infiltrating an account and so on? And how do I get at that information, be able to continually assess that information and correlate it all so that I can make good decisions, and using automation as well. So when we talk to customers that mostly fit into one of these three buckets, if you will, when it comes to security, maturity, and investment. So customers 2 and 3 in this picture want the capabilities of customer 1, right? But they don't have the same resources, the same time, the same budget, same people. Our goal with XDR, extended detection and response, is to help customers 2 and 3 achieve the maturity of customer 1. And for a level 1 security analyst to have the effectiveness of a level 2 analyst. So let's look at that environment. What's going on here? Getting into this a little bit deeper. So this is basically the situation without XDR. So in a lot of agencies, companies today, the security analysts have a very tough job because there are a lot of silos of visibility and investigation. For example, they might use EDR, endpoint detection response, to get detailed visibility for suspicious activity on endpoints, but then a separate siloed view of network security alerts and traffic analysis. And for the cloud workloads, likely very limited visibility today to suspicious activity in that environment, maybe using tools like EDR that don't know enough about the different environment, and a little, if any, visibility into undiscovered threats already existing in the user's mailboxes. So there's a lot of things going on without XDR. So those silos are sending lots of alerts to the SIEM, right? Thousands and thousands of alerts, but without any context or correlation with other events. So that makes it really hard to decide what's important and how the alerts are related to each other. And attackers, of course, don't stay in those silos. They move throughout the environment. And then it's up to the security team to try to piece together the viewpoints of all of the different silos to figure out what happened. The XDR approach delivers faster detection and response across the entire environment because it breaks down those silos and it tells a story instead of making the SOC team dig through thousands of noisy alerts. XDR gets its telemetry from not just the endpoint, but the cloud, email, and network, using automation and big data to build the story view and save time for the SOC. So instead of, say, forwarding thousands and thousands of events to the SIEM, here are the 4 that you really need to worry about. So that enables security teams to detect threats faster, more easily understand what happened and shut down the attack sooner. So when you combine these features like correlated detection, better alerting, and the ability to investigate, it leads to lower risk and quicker remediation. So organizations, customers that have XDR, this is the XDR Payoff Better Security Posture Report from ESG Research back in September of 2020, even suffered half as many successful attacks over the last year. They were more than twice likely to detect a data breach or successful attack in a few days or less, which is really bringing down the time, and 60% less likely to report that attack repropagated. Maybe it was sitting in a mailbox, another link, somebody clicked on it, and that's been going on continuously as well. So the important thing about XDR is that each of those pieces adds value, whether you have one or several, but the more you have, the more complete story you can have, the more data that we can feed to Zero Trust Risk Insights and get the full and complete picture. So adding security analytics and detection in response to any of the layers by itself adds value, but obviously the more you have, the merrier, right? EDR is the most common starting point, since most attacks target users. But of course, 94% of malware stems from email, so attacks are targeting users with phishing. So we need to have visibility into there. Cloud's critical to the operations of a business. Having the security controls in there gives us more activity data to tell a more complete story of what's happening. And for sure, the network, which is complementary to EDR, to see the blind spots. How's the attacker moving across the organization? How is the threat communicating out? Looking at unmanaged devices, legacy, and so forth. So having all of these pieces together now allows us to feed better data and to really build out what we're seeing when we're talking about Zero Trust Risk Insights. So we're monitoring and analyzing the risk across 6 different factors, and you'll see that the different pieces of XDR play into these: threat detection, users or devices with a high number of threat detections, right? So we have to have that visibility into the endpoint. Bottom left, cloud app activity, right? SaaS applications being attacked, access to risky apps, which of those cloud apps are sanctioned, which are not sanctioned. Account compromise, so unusual login behavior, internal phishing emails, credential dumping, etc. Vulnerability detection, so having the visibility not only to the endpoint, but to the servers and cloud instances. Unpatched vulnerabilities are the #1 ways that attackers are getting into those machines and devices. And so looking at operating system and application vulnerabilities and being able to prioritize based on exploit activity that we're seeing, right? So make sure that while you have time to patch, we're putting in a filter to block the exploit of that vulnerability. But again, those vulnerable devices will feed into the Zero Trust Risk Insights. And anomaly detection, so unusual data transfer and email behavior. So Zero Trust Risk Insights monitors and analyzes the risks across those 6 different factors. And what that allows us to do then is to give an overall risk score. So a CISO can see, has the visibility and the trending lines as to how the organization is doing overall for risk. And you can see it's broken down by a number of factors and scores: account compromise, vulnerability detection, anomaly detection, cloud app activity, XDR detection, and threat detection. Where are the trends going? Are they trending up and down? How are we doing? And also, how do we compare with our peers? So this is really important for, say, a CISO to have this kind of visibility and trending. And the SOC analysts with this dashboard, so you can see not only the overall risk, but where do I need to prioritize? Where do I need to look to start taking corrective action? Where are my most at-risk users and devices, and what kinds of risk are we talking about? Brute force attacks, you can see there, risky user with anomalous email activity, all those kinds of things. So to uncover account compromise risks, Zero Trust Risk Insights continually monitors over 50 types of events across leaked accounts, suspicious user activity, and also accounts targeted by attackers. So you can see the three different, all the kinds of events that we're looking at there for those indicators. So when we look at a particular user's risk score, now we have all of this information that's fed up from the different XDR sensors, and we can take a look at where is which category is contributing the highest. For instance, is it account compromise? So here's a chart that really shows what we're using when we're calculating the Zero Trust risk score for an individual user, in this case, Adele Vance. We're looking at account compromise, anomaly detection, cloud app activity, all the points listed on the screen so that we can get the complete picture and be able to take the appropriate action based on the severity of what we're seeing. So once we have that information, we can take a look. In this case, we're just looking at vulnerabilities, so we can pull out the highest priority and attack that one, prioritizing the remediation for that particular vulnerability. And having that information, we get into the actual device. So the vulnerabilities on the device, what kinds of risk indicators are happening, risky websites being accessed, operating system vulnerabilities. So much of what happens in terms of an attack on an operating system is based on the fact usually that it's legacy and it's no longer supported or sunsetted by Microsoft, let's say. So agencies, companies running Windows 2003 server, 2008 server, there aren't any more patches coming out for those operating systems to deal with exploits. But we can filter out, we can put filter rules in place to protect against those only after we know where our riskiest devices are and what vulnerabilities are happening. Having that XDR data being fed up also from cloud apps gives us, and email gives us the capability of saying, okay, here, look, here's all the apps, the cloud apps that users are running, broken down by a number of different categories. Are these sanctioned? Are these unsanctioned? And then we can take action on those as well. All of this feeds into the entire company's or agency's risk score. So you get your risk index and what that's based on, how it's broken down into the 6 categories that we're looking at currently. And those are evolving as we go on and discover more. Maybe we determine that there's another category that needs to be put in here. But that score is based on 1,000 or more users risk scoring, take into account 1,200 devices, however many it is, and we're taking that sum total and doing all kinds of magical wizardry math and calculation and coming up with the entire customer's risk score. So just to bring it home, coming back to this whole idea of this information that we're feeding so that we can make better decisions with Zero Trust stem from having a solid base of XDR, not EDR, endpoint detection, but XDR, extended detection and response, where we're looking at data from the endpoint, the servers, the cloud, email, and network, so that we can correlate that information, combine it with security analytics and threat intelligence, and figure out, where does the work need to start to be done, so that we can make the remediation and focused decisions a lot easier. So I thought it might be useful to just take a step back and talk a little bit about XDR and what it really is, because there's a lot of buzzwords and buzz acronyms in our industry, and sometimes it's not clear exactly what one means. But in this case, having this capability to have extended detection and response, just collecting the data from all of these previously siloed places allows us to correlate and make good decisions, figure out where our risks truly are, have that zero trust data, and be able to remediate in short order. And with that, I say thank you for allowing me to share some thoughts with you.
Thank you so much, David. And it looks like there's a couple questions for you in the chat. So if you want to respond back, you can type your answers, or if you want to provide your email address to that person, maybe they'll
Look at
reach out
that.
directly.
11:15, Kirsten. I mean, come on. Right on the money.
Yeah, you did it right on the dot.
Right on the
I
money.
think you
Okay,
might
let's
be
see.
the only person who's ever ended right on time. So thank you.
Do I get a prize? Okay, question for David. How do you mitigate algorithm bias if only a recommended number of alerts are sent to a human based on gathered telemetry? Babur, I'm trying to figure out. Let me read it again. How do you mitigate?
Well, we're going to get started with our next panel, but you can still hang out on mute and you can respond through the chat.
Sure. Yeah, no problem at all.
So, all good. Thank you so much, David. It was great having you.
Thank you.
Bye. So like I said, we're ready for our next panel of the day. If our panelists could come on camera and unmute yourselves, I'll have you all introduce. But first, I just want to remind our audience again, keep those questions coming in the chat and we'll get those answered. And when the poll questions come up, make sure that you answer those if you want to receive your CPE credits. So we'll start with Jonathan. Jonathan, could you please introduce yourself? I see Jonathan, but he's not on camera yet. So never mind. We'll go over to Bill.
Good morning. Trying to get my camera.
Oh, there he is. Okay, Jonathan, we'll start with you.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Jonathan Fibus. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. As we go forward on our zero trust architecture and availability journey, we are now more than ever focused on our identity and access management for individuals. We'll be building on that in the future as we'll come up with during the discussion. So thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. And then now we'll jump over to Bill for introductions.
Thank you, Kirsten. Good morning. My name is Bill Harrod. I'm Public Sector CTO for Avanti. Avanti is a software company that is dedicated to discovering, managing, securing, and providing the service underlaying the service bus to help agencies across the federal government secure and protect their data. And I'm also leading the effort that we have with the NCCOE Zero Trust Lab.
Thanks, Bill. And then over to Shane.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shane Barney. I am the Chief Information Security Officer for USCIS. We're a component of DHS. We're responsible for administering the immigration system and refugee and asylum activities as well. We are a very cloud-heavy organization and actually started down the zero trust pathway like in 2018, I believe, or something like that. We actually included in our strategy documentation in as early as 2019. Because it became very apparent to us the need for this type of architecture and approach to securing our environments, especially in cloud. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. And the discussion today centers around and implementing zero trust principles. So we'll just jump right into it. Jonathan, what is a best strategy that you would recommend for implementing and applying zero trust principles within your agency? If you could pick just one, what would you say has helped you the most on your journey thus far?
So having strong access controls in place, being able to identify both users, devices, well, both users, devices, and data elements that we want to manage has been a huge, fantastic starting point for figuring out what needs to be controlled, and then lets us provide controls individually for each combination of users, endpoints, and data elements.
And Shane, I'm going to toss the same question over to you. What's a strategy that you would recommend that's really helped you at your agencies?
Well, I think one of the best, one of the best kind of starting points if you're going to have one, because when you start looking at the entire architecture and the overall, it is massive, it is unwieldy. It's, in some ways people look at it and just kind of throw their hands up and walk away because you really are, tearing your entire enterprise apart and rebuilding. When you kind of look at it from a monolithic perspective, it's daunting. And so USCIS's approach has always sort of been that agile sort of methodology where you start small, you take smaller little chunks, small chunks of the project, and you just start iterating towards your solutions that you're after, with the understanding that these smaller efforts lead to larger efforts and so on. More importantly, though, it allows you to fail early, fail often, and we failed often, but fail forward so that your list becomes a learning activity as you move. And then making sure that you start with the basics. This is not zero trusted architecture is not a tools discussion. It's an overarching architect. It's a program in and of itself. It's very foundational in terms of what it does and how it operates and what it will do to your enterprise. So start focusing on defining what trust is. What does that look like in your organization? How does trust degrade over time? How does trust from asset to asset degrade? How does geography impact trust? How does data access impact trust? Understanding those fundamentals going in will help you, avoid some of those sort of pitfalls and some of the things that you're going to run into as you go, and also give you a sort of a starting block point where you can say, okay, this is what we understand our enterprise of trust to look like and want it to look like. Now where are we missing something? And then begin applying some of these strategic pillars and that NIST has put out and OMB has put out, because you really need to understand very, very detailed what your trust enterprise looks like, or what you want it to look like.
Bill, would you have any additional insights from a strategy standpoint?
Well, I think Sean and Jonathan have both made really good points, right? That zero trust is a framework. Zero trust architecture is an overarching sort of model. And as Jonathan said at the top, identity is going to be critical. When we started with the pandemic and everybody moved to remote telework, we quickly found out that the enterprise suddenly became a much more pervious type of system. So the enterprise extended to remote devices, personal devices in many cases, but being able to have that concept of the identity, and then knowing what all those devices are and being able to detect and secure them is really a critical piece of the overall zero trust framework.
Thank you, gentlemen. Let's go ahead and pop up our first poll question, please. Get the audience thinking. This poll question is, are you addressing modern endpoints such as mobile devices into your zero trust architecture plans? So we'll give folks a moment to respond to that. Actually, maybe we can go ahead and discuss this. Jonathan, do you feel, or what's your take on modern endpoints being addressed in zero tech architecture?
So the NRC has been focused on mobility for years. We have a very mobile workforce. They're out doing inspections at licensees. They're attending conferences. Working in the office has been something that hasn't been the default method for our users connecting to our network for quite some time. So without being able to leverage those modern endpoints, we lose a lot of productivity. We lose a lot of input from our users. So we've been focused on mobility for years. Fortunately, when the health emergency hit, we were over 95% laptop users. Over 70% of our users leverage BYO products, whether mobile devices, tablets, or personal laptops. So without that flexibility, we would not be able to have people be productive. It's the way people are working. It's the wave of the present, let alone the wave of the future.
And it looks like from that poll, most people are saying they are being addressed, or otherwise they just don't know. Shane, do you have any additional insights into mobile?
Actually, this question, it kind of highlights my issue with the term zero trust, because it's really kind of misleading. It's not exactly what it is. Really, it's better understood as asset trust. And when you look at it from that perspective, anything that's considered an asset within your enterprise, be it a mobile device, a server, a virtual environment, it doesn't matter, is actually part of your environment and has to be accounted for. Even if you're accounting to discount it, it still needs to be accounted for, because the fundamentally you're going to have to be able to figure out how to do identity and identity management, role-based management between all of your assets. They're all going to have their own roles. They're all going to have their own sets of identities associated with them and how that works. So if you're not including every single asset within your environment and organization, you're sort of failing out the gate.
Thank you for those insights. Bill, were you going to add anything additional?
I think that's a good point, and Shane's right. It's at the end of the day, zero trust is really a framework to protecting the applications and data of the organization. And as a result, we need to know what all of the devices are that access the network, and what everything is on the network, right? So it sort of goes back to the CDM model of knowing who's on the network and what's on the network and what's happening on the network. And so that's right. We need to look at all of the devices that connect in, even IoT and industrial IoT, and being able to make all of that a part of the asset inventory that we manage, in order to understand how we grant access, and what trust we allocate.
Thank you, Bill. We're going to take a quick break from my questions and answer some audience questions. Maria stated that providing end-to-end network paths and better support for microsegmentation, the transition to IPv6 only is going to be a key component of zero trust architecture. So this person is asking, from Shane and Jonathan, would you please comment on how your agency is approaching this?
The IPv6 implementation?
Yes.
Hello, Maria. It's nice to hear from you. She comes from USCIS. She's people's. No, we're actually including IPv6 in the move towards it as part of our overarching plans with zero trust. So we factored it in, and I agree. It's an important aspect. It's not everything, but it is definitely part of the solution. I'm not sure. There's some people who would say that IPv6 adds, all these extra layers of security, and it does help in some areas, but doesn't always. So it's just one of those layers of security that we're adding in at different points and aspects, different intersections in your enterprise that'll become critical in certain applications and less so in others. But it definitely has to be incorporated and accounted for, because it is the future. So if you're not thinking about it now, you'll be forced to think about it later.
Jonathan, do you have an additional comment on IPv6?
Yeah, as Shane said, it's the future and has been the future for a while. But as we move forward with getting IPv6 on all our networks by 2025, it's a key component of trust. It's also a key question as we look at the various data assets that we have. Are they compliant? Can they be compliant with IPv6? So it's helping us focus on modernization as well as we look at the legacy data, the legacy applications that we have. So it's all part of the plan moving forward.
Bill, maybe you would want to take this next audience question. How do you link multiple legacy systems, often with different user credentials within them? And what rollout approach would you recommend?
Well, I think without sort of begging the question, I think we don't link the systems, frankly. I think we need to make independent access control decisions for each system and each resource. Certainly being able to leverage identity and identity federation, and then to be able to do policy enforcement and access control decisions on a resource by resource or application by application basis is really critical. And I think that's part of the underlying concept of zero trust, is that we don't We don't inherit any trust. We don't grant trust based on a single authentication, but rather once we understand the user's context, what network they're coming from, what device they're coming from, what credential they're using, then use the policy controls and access controls to do continuous authorization to be able to grant access to systems. That may not have exactly answered the question, but I think that's, sort of tying it back to zero trust. I think that's one of the precepts that we need to understand.
And going back to mobile devices, this is for anyone on the panel. Do you allow for personal devices on the network using asset trust without agents on that device? And if so, how?
So we do allow for BYO. We have a couple of different methodologies. First, if you're accessing a web-based asset, we have ways of doing multi-factor authentication. So again, we've got a strong identity component to that. Next, we evaluate the device to make sure that it is supportable, and we post a list of requirements for devices to be able to participate in a BYO program. So we have some basic level of assurance that it's going to meet configuration requirements, application requirements, version requirements, patching requirements. And then we make decisions based on the specific type of information to be accessed. So there are some elements of data that we don't want accessed as part of our BYO program. We make that clear up front. We have a very clear developed policy so that users know what to expect. And it seems to be working. We have not discovered any breaches or had any unusual spills from this over the past several years. So it seems to be appropriate at this point. And we keep evaluating as we move forward with new data sources, with new technologies, and as vulnerabilities are discovered in the wild.
These are great audience questions. Please keep them coming. But we're going to shift back over to zero trust implementation. Let's talk challenges. What is a main challenge that you have experienced while implementing and applying zero trust principles within your agency? I mean, I'm sure there's more than one, but just pick the top one. And if you have overcome that with some sort of solution, maybe you can share that now as well. So can we hear from Shane first on this, please?
Yeah, sure. We've been discussing a lot about identity and the importance of identity, and there's no doubt identity and having good, solid control of your identity infrastructure is critical. And we, like all organizations, suffered and tried to implement our ICAM solutions and getting control. One of the things one of our former CIOs did, which was rather brilliant at the time and didn't even recognize it until later, is he, unlike most security organizations, I own ICAM as a CISO. I mean, they report to me, they're part of my organization. The CIO at the time tied together people. If you're a system owner or part of the business owner side of a first system, you had to go and get an authorization to put the system online or authorization to do releases. He would block the releases and the authorizations unless they had compliance with single sign-on, unless they had already enrolled and done all the role-based access workflows necessary to ensure the system was properly compliant. Because of that, that was the problem, was getting everybody in board. It's a very big thing to get an enterprise switched over to something like that and get used to doing something like that. But because he tied it into the security requirements, it became an easy button factor for us. And it's, my agency now has 100% single sign-on, 100% role-based access for everything we have. It solved a whole lot of problems right out the gate. So getting that up front and really getting a good handle on it really was so important. We didn't even realize it at the time. I mean, this is before we even thought about what zero trust would look like, or even the concept of zero trust. And now looking back, I see how important that step was in our kind of our march forward. And then from there, we were able to put in place things like secrets management in a centralized fashion as part of our identity infrastructure. We're now deploying more of an automated approach to certificate management. All these things are going to become very critical as you move forward in determining the identity and the access capabilities of all the different assets on your enterprise. So from my perspective, get that right.
Yeah, thank you. And Jonathan, from your perspective, do you have a different challenge you've experienced and overcome?
No, I would say the first starting block is that identity management. If you have hundreds or dozens of usernames and passwords, it's not going to help you get into a zero trust mode. You need to have that identity management first, and then you can move on from there. So if focusing on legacy applications and how to move them into your single sign program is probably going to be one of the first most important steps you can take towards implementing zero trust.
Bill, coming from industry and working with the government, what's a top challenge that you've recognized?
So like Shane and Jonathan, I think identity is really critical, and that identity exists in many cases, both on-prem and in the cloud. And then being able to tie those together and understand the assets and the authorizations is a big piece of it. And then the second piece, I think, really is understanding that asset inventory. So understanding what's on the network and that broader extended network, including the resources that you're trying to protect down to the data level, and knowing what the targets are is really critical in order to be able to protect them appropriately.
Fantastic. We are right on time for poll number 2. So if we could please pop that up and have our audience answer. What is the biggest obstacle for achieving zero trust architecture compliance? Your options include the lack of trained resources, lack of executive support, lack of tools or technical solutions, or lack of funding. And I do believe we have another audience question. Yes, this one is new. What is your recommendation in fixing the human element of cyber? Technology is available for zero trust in IDM, but the blocker, maybe the decision maker in an organization, could be a challenge. So thoughts around the human element. Shane?
Actually, it's great they bring it up. I was thinking about this earlier as one of the major sort of pain points in going forward with zero trust. Really, when you start, because of the nature of what zero trust is and the changes that it invokes throughout the enterprise, it does add friction. It's not adding an easy button to, well, it does in some respects, because you're going to simplify people's passwords files, because now they shouldn't have one. But it really does add friction at a number of different layers. They're going to be required to do putting in their PIN more often. They're going to be required to they're going to get pulled in questions, and a lot of different things are going to be happening. So really, part of what's got to happen is driving cultural change. It's such a big factor of this. I don't think people fully take into account how important that is. And having people understand that their role in this architecture is really important going forward. So getting literally your enterprise on board with you, come on team, rallying the teams and going forward is so important. Former CIO of ours, understood when he was trying to implement some of the agile principles and cloud technologies at USCIS, understood that, and literally spent almost 3 years doing nothing but cultural change. Just getting people's minds wrapped around what we're talking about. And frankly, one of the things USCIS is focusing heavily on right now is just that piece of it, is getting the culture of the enterprise behind it. It is a leadership issue. I mean, you've got to have your leadership buy-in. You've got to have them helping you drive it. It can't just be the CISO waving the zero trust flag. It's got to be everybody. It's an all or kind of almost an all or nothing kind of approach.
Bill, would you like to respond as well?
I think Shane's points are good, right? It is a cultural change. I think that's really true, and the entire organization needs to be behind it. And part of it is education. Certainly what we have seen is that the greatest threat continues to be ransomware in many cases, and a lot of that is via email. And although it's not a popular thing, education and stressing that is really critical. And then I think the other piece of it is moving from that single sign-on really to zero sign-on, right? So leveraging the derived credential and being able to understand the context and even down to the behavioral attributes and making that all part of the authentication decision is a key piece of being able to drive change.
Well, thank you all for answering these questions. And with the last 5 minutes, I want to give each of our panelists the opportunity to share one key takeaway that you really want to drive home for our audience, that if they come away with anything from this summit, what would that thing be? And we will start with Jonathan, please.
Darn. The key takeaway for Zero Trust is demonstrating those benefits. Explaining and being able to show how it's going to impact budget, how it's going to impact user productivity, how it's going to impact flexibility. As workers expect more ability to be mobile, as workers expect less security intervention in their daily work, putting in a username and password, as opposed to putting in a PIN or moving to the derived credential, as Bill just mentioned. You need to demonstrate that benefit. The other thing that you need to work on is the behind the scenes flow to make sure that you're tracking your users through their needs to access. Because as someone gets a different job, their data requirements are going to change, and you need to make sure you keep up with that. Otherwise, you move from zero trust to trusting everything, and you're back in the same challenges that you currently have.
That's great. Thank you. And then Shane, what would you like to leave our audience with?
I think it's this, zero trust, asset trust, whatever you want to call it, is a data-driven type of security. In other words, there's a tremendous amount of data that goes in, tremendous data that comes out, and a lot of data that needs to be analyzed, and ensuring that you're on top of all that. It is very overwhelming for a security program, regardless of scale. Nobody can scale the number of resources on hand to continue doing the operations at normal and working in a zero trust environment, and especially if you're cloud-based. So, the big takeaway I would want people to know is that as a security program, you're going to have to change along with that architecture. You're going, you need to heavily focus on security automation, not just in your SOC. It's got to be across your program. You need to be looking to automate your FISMA controls. You need to be looking to automate your documentation and how you do that, and making sure you're staying on top of that. And of course, this means then that development is critical for you, not just the development teams themselves, but you yourself as a CISO, you yourself as a security professional need access to development teams and data scientists. So making sure your contract vehicles and your vendors are providing those resources up front. You do not want to get behind the 8 ball on this. By the time you do, you're trying to play catch up, it's going to be a hard slog, and it'll be an uphill battle. And then finally, thinking about it, especially as you move, a lot of organizations move more into the cloud, and making sure you understand the basic principle that if your infrastructure is code, your security is code too. So you got to fundamentally change the nature of your security program to match that. It's something we're not getting rid of all your analysts and your software, so that's kind of the risk analysts, all the people you've traditionally had, but you're going to start augmenting your team with personnel types that you normally wouldn't have had as you move forward. It's going to be very important. It's something USCIS started doing a couple of years ago, and we just continue to accelerate that pace. So I hope that I was not very brief, but it was brief-ish.
That was perfect. Thank you, Shane. And Bill, we will end with you, sir.
Well, thanks very much, Kirsten, and thanks to ATARC for doing this. And it's been great to be with Shane and Jonathan on this. I think the key takeaways are that Zero Trust is a framework to how we improve security, and it needs to start at that distributed endpoint, whether it's a modern mobile device or whether it's a more traditional endpoint, but knowing what the device is, knowing who the users are, and then being able to manage that authentication and the authorization, and enforce policy-based access controls, whether those resources be running on-premise or in the cloud, and being able to automate it. As Shane said, I think a lot of this is going to have to be around how do we automate the flows, the data flows, the workflows, to be able to do those access control decisions, and make smart choices about how we provide authorization. And in many ways, what we see is that the change now is that the security perimeter has shrunk down to being that perimeter around the specific resource or the asset, or the data, and authorizing access to that is really critical. So thanks again for your support on this, Kirsten, and nice to be with you guys today.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen, so much. It's been an honor and it's been a pleasure. So we look forward to having you back. And we are ending right on time. Perfect. So next up, we have our second technology talk of the day. This time we will be hearing from the principal security architect over at Nutanix, and we will be hearing from Neil Ashworth. So Neil, over to you.
Hi, and welcome to this presentation on Zero Trust architecture and how to simplify your journey to Zero Trust with Nutanix. I'm Neil Ashworth. I'm a solutions architect for security and networking at Nutanix, and today I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts on the strategies that you can use immediately to further secure your data center against cyber threats by closer aligning to those principles found in Zero Trust. So then, why is Zero Trust noteworthy right now? If you're not familiar with the specifics of Zero Trust architecture, I don't blame you. Specifics and measurable criteria within this framework are, I would argue, more conceptual than specific, and yet it holds quite a critical importance to the nation's cybersecurity defense strategy going forward. Earlier this year, the Biden administration issued an executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity, and this document outlines that federal information systems and private sector IT wanting to do business with federal agencies must heighten their security strategy. And specifically in Section 3 of that executive order, it calls out the federal government must adopt security best practices advance towards Zero Trust architecture. And so on the slide, I've linked both the executive order and the document for Zero Trust architecture. The NIST special publication 800-207 for Zero Trust architecture is specific. It actually goes on to state that everyone is to try and accelerate movement to secure cloud services, including software as a service, infrastructure as a service, and platform as a service. Which, so what does that mean? Well, this model that we see of traditional infrastructure, which is segmented by zones of trust. You can see that we've got networks to achieve zones of trust, HR, IT, DMZ, other networks. And defending that, an ever-increasing endpoint boundary, often retroactively and at great cost, against this concept of frontal attacks has significant difficulties, if not impossible hurdles to overcome in order to achieve Zero Trust compliant architecture. It's limited really in its evolution primarily because of its physical constraints, which is now really feeling the stretch which are imposed by the demands of a cloud generation. Further compounding these limitations of traditional infrastructure, we've got the security team, and they're equally stretched by the demands put upon them by a perimeter-centric security strategy, which is a sprawling landscape of endpoints, it's complicated networks, and it's bringing various technology boundaries and dozens of measurements and analytic tools, etc., and trying to maintain any type of legibility in all of that chaos. And so historically, we've used this perimeter-based approach to security, firewalls and blocking frontal attacks to our trusted network, because in those early internet days, it was quite effective at stopping attacks at the time, which were server-side attacks, internet worms, and brute force dictionary attacks. Unfortunately, even the evolution of these strategies just can't compete with the unexpected global threat seen in the increases of compromises that we see all of the time, such as ransomware and IP theft that we see just year on year on year. And so the perimeter's dead, effectively. We need to change the mindset to one of expecting internal networks to be compromised and approaching architectural design with the assumption that all infrastructure is hostile, and that helps drive a zero trust mindset. No trust values, only authentication. The other thing that needs to be considered is the inclusion of a multi or hybrid cloud infrastructure strategy. To achieve zero trust goes beyond access attempts and authentication improvements. We're talking about monitoring and logging all of the assets, which is essential, as is isolation of resources at a granular level from a VM perspective, even from a data perspective, such as with technologies which can provide microsegmentation rather than or inclusive of zonal segmentation. And so this new world of global connections and this expanding footprint and data explosion, it's quite clear that effective solutions will just simply have to unify the security architecture, which now spans these two spaces of private and public cloud. So at Nutanix, I'd like to think that we're a practical and innovative bunch of people. We like to think outside of the box, but sometimes the answer to the future can be found in the past. So let's start there. Here we've got the most common security mistakes from 20 years ago. If I was to give you a minute to read that, you'd no doubt see some familiarity. But now we've got a list from this year. Same measurement of statistical most common security mistakes seen today. And I see a lot of similarities here, almost as if the issues we're seeing today are simple evolutions of the issues we faced 20 years ago. Password management and password complexity, unattended endpoints and unattended access points, opening email attachments and opening email attachments, the absence of AV and the problem of corruption in AV, files set to public access and S3 buckets set to public access, plug and play without permission and unknown flash drives, not reporting and a lack of education, and patching. I could keep going on. I'm sure if this list was longer. And what this tells me is that, well, first and foremost, this should be everyone's first priority when trying to address your own environments for security. And so with this list at Nutanix, we can begin to think of ways to innovate to either help simplify, automate, or eliminate entirely many of the issues and processes found in this list. So we can actually start addressing the security issues that people face. Thank you for your time today. If you're interested in learning more, please reach out to a Nutanix representative who can talk you through some of the Nutanix platform and technologies that we're using to try and closer align to a zero trust architecture future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Neil. That was excellent. Up next, we will be hearing from Public Sector Business Development Manager at Tenable, Chris Jensen. Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Kirsten. Let me share my screen and we'll get underway. All right, thank you. As the title shows, I'd just like to take a couple minutes and talk about dynamic security as a zero trust enabler. And what I mean by that is you cannot have zero trust if you're measuring your environment with static tools. And the two areas I want to address are these. There we go. Behind almost every breach headline is a known vulnerability and an insecure Active Directory. So the two areas I'd like to touch on today are known vulnerabilities and Active Directory, because if you're basing your vulnerability management solution on CVSS, a static measure, then you're setting yourself up for disaster. And let's talk about what that means. The two things you need to do today are, first and foremost, and what Tenable provides for you, is unparalleled visibility into the modern attack surface. You cannot protect what you can't see. And Tenable, with our Nessus vulnerability scanner, will provide you a complete picture of your environment. The bad news is, of course, that there are more vulnerabilities today than there have ever been, and the ramp continues to go up. So it's essential that you prioritize the remediation, the patching, so that using the power of prediction, you're focused on those relatively few vulnerabilities that actually pose risk. And CISA recently emphasized this in their binding operational directive that just came out, I think last week. And Director Easterly was quoted saying exactly what we've been saying at Tenable, which is that the percentage of vulnerabilities that actually pose risk is a very small percentage. And so if you can focus on those, you can be far more efficient in your vulnerability management practices and also much more effective in securing your environment. This is a picture of that. If you look at the upper right, you can see what I mentioned, which is that the numbers of vulnerabilities have continued to climb on an annual basis to where they've exceeded 18,000 in 2020. And we expect in 2021, it will go even higher. So if you could focus on this 3%, you're talking about over the course of a year, 500, give or take, 500 to 600 versus 18,000. And oh, by the way, if you didn't have that measure and you're using CVSS, you could patch 17,000 and have missed the ones that really matter. So what we do at Tenable is harness the power of prediction using predictive prioritization that incorporates CVSS, that one piece, but also research insights, threat intelligence, and vulnerability metrics to deliver what we call a vulnerability priority rating, which is similar to CVSS in its scale, which is 0 to 10, but it's updated daily, incorporates constant changes in the threat environment to deliver that dynamic information that you need to secure your environment. So that is how you address known vulnerabilities. Let's turn to chapter 2 about Active Directory. No matter how well you do in patching your environment through phishing or other means, the hackers can still get in. How do they do that? Well, Active Directory is their path. Once they get in, this is a picture of what they do. They get an initial foothold through phishing or a vulnerability. They explore. Initially, they're in a read-only mode, and then they find a way to elevate privileges, move laterally to the end of the line here, which is exfiltration, where they're extracting data and holding the target for ransom. So if you could stop them at this explore stage, if you could detect an intrusion in real time, you can prevent damage. If you're using a static measure, such as a periodic Microsoft assessment that gives you a report Well, as soon as that report is delivered, it's out of date. You need a real-time tool. And that is what Tenable AD provides you. With Tenable AD, you're able to, number one, find and fix your existing weaknesses. Number two, uncover new attack paths, continuously identifying new vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. Number three, detect ongoing attacks in real time, so you can shut them down, so you can keep them at this explore stage and not let them move laterally. And number four, it allows you to look back, investigate incidents, and hunt for threats. So if you have an active directory, a dynamic tool such as Tenable AD, you can maintain a secure Active Directory. And this is important. Why? Because Active Directory is at the center of trust. You cannot have an effective zero trust architecture if you have an insecure Active Directory. Putting this into a pictorial view, this is a zero trust architecture where the subject on the left is trying to obtain access to the enterprise resources on the right. What's in the middle? The policy enforcement point, Tenable Active Directory. And if you're not using a tool such as Tenable AD to secure your Active Directory, you can't trust your system to protect you against the hackers that are trying to get into that system. So it's not a matter of zero trust, it's a matter of what can you trust. And with Tenable AD, you can trust your Active Directory to effectively monitor and prevent the hackers from getting into your environment. So thank you very much. I appreciate this brief opportunity. This is my contact information, Chris Jensen. You can reach me at cjensen@tenable.com, or any of our Tenable representatives will be more than happy from our federal team to take you through this at a much deeper level and help you understand further how using these dynamic tools is essential to maintaining security in a zero trust architecture environment. Thanks very much, Kirsten. Appreciate the opportunity to talk today.
Thank you, Chris.
Stop sharing.
Thank you, Chris. That was excellent, and we look forward to having you back again. Now we will be introducing our third panel of the day, and moderating this session is Jason Miller from Federal News Network.
Right, Kirsten, thank you so much. Bill Wright, John Sims, put your cameras on, join us. Good to see everyone again. And of course, thanks to Tom Suter and all the folks at ATARC for inviting me to moderate. It's always a pleasure to attend these events and be a part of them. As you heard, or as you read, I'm Jason Miller, Executive Editor of Federal News Network. Of course, you can find us on 1500 AM in the DC area, and of course, everywhere on federalnewsnetwork.com. Since we have a shorter than usual panel, and you've already spent the day hearing all about zero trust, I decided just to offer you a couple quick facts and figures to get your mind thinking ahead of our panelists. So a couple quick statistics to get you going. First, it starts with a question. Zero trust. When do you remember you first heard about this concept or first really heard of this title? Was it during the buzz machine of 2018 when everybody wanted to have a zero trust something or other? Was it 10 or 15 years ago when someone somehow talked about this concept at an event? Think about it. Because for me, and I actually had to look this up just recently, it was back in 2016 when none other than former chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, Chairman Jason Chaffetz, actually wrote a column for Federal News Network. In that column, he wrote about how the agencies need to move to zero trust approach in the wake of the OPM breach. It took nearly 2 years until industry and others really started pushing hard for these zero trust concepts. But it's just very interesting that it goes back to an unlikely person in a member of Congress. And then it also was about going back to 2016 for us. Second, little facts and figures to get you going. When it comes to agencies spending money on zero trust architectures and tools and the like, it's a little hard to calculate, but we know what's happening. And quick example, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, you heard from Shane Barney, their CISO earlier today, I know that. But USCIS plans to award a contract that could be worth as much as $180 million for cybersecurity services that leans heavily on the concepts that fall under zero trust. USCIS, according to Bloomberg Government, has doubled its cybersecurity spending in 2021, and that expects to continue to increase in 2022. And in fact, that's true for most agencies. In the Biden administration's 2022 budget request to Congress, which is still working through the process today, agencies asked for more than $20 billion for cybersecurity efforts, including $9.8 billion for civilian agencies, which is 14% higher than in 2021. A lot of money being spent. A lot of that's going to be around Zero Trust. You saw that with the TMF Technology Modernization Fund Awards as well. So a lot going on. Okay, get your mind going. Now you have something to think about as our panelists tell you something you don't know. And this is what I've asked them to do. Take about 3 to 5 minutes or so to give you an update on what they're working on in Zero Trust, how it works, what they're seeing, what the trends, something that maybe you haven't heard today or haven't heard recently about. And then we're going to get to your questions. Audience questions are very important today. Remember, I'm a reporter. It's my job to ask questions. They'd much rather hear from you. So please, please, please participate. I will be monitoring the Q&A portion. All right, with that being said, let's turn to our guests. John Sims, why don't you lead us off? You're from CISA. That's all the intros I do. John, take it away.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate you inviting me to the panel today. Just to put things in perspective, over the last couple of months, we've been working on the public comment adjudication on the cloud security TRA that was deliverable for the executive order 14028. As well as we're reviewing the comments on our Zero Trust maturity model, which is a maturity model that was principally led by myself and Sean Connolly, the TIC program manager, to help facilitate the Zero Trust plans that were due within 60 days of the release of the executive order. In addition to that, as part of the aftermath, 90 days is a quick spin for developing a lot of these deliverables. And really, we had to double back a little bit and kind of reset some expectations in terms of what Zero Trust really means to the federal community, but also to our agency in particular, as we start looking at, changing how we do business to help support Zero Trust, because it is very different. It's really about looking at how you move security away from the network and move it closer to the data and support the application. And I think that, when we look at cloud and we look at, how we're going to facilitate Zero Trust into the future under Zero Trust architecture and principles, we've got to fundamentally shift our thinking away from that network-centric base of cybersecurity and visibility and look at how we can support it in a risk-based approach. You mentioned the OPM data breach. I think that's an excellent way to kind of set some expectations with regard to, we really need to focus Zero Trust where it really is going to help us change the dynamic in federal cybersecurity. And you talk about OPM, that was also the lead incident that allowed us to start the HVA program. And so from my perspective, as someone who's been involved in CDM, involved in managing the HVA program, I definitely agree that we've got to look at Zero Trust as a mechanism by which we fundamentally shift the architectures for HVAs. Lastly, I'll just say that one of the other important things that we've been doing is working with an agency on looking at how Zero Trust maps to 853, because I think there's a pretty significant delta there when we talk about it in terms of like what that mapping looks like and how the IGs are going to assess and evaluate the agencies as they do annually for the FISMA report. Over to you, Jason.
All right, a couple quick follow-ups there. But first, we're going to get to our first poll of the day. We have a couple of them today. So if the folks from ATARC wants to put up that first poll, there it is. And while everyone's answering it, let me ask you a quick follow-up, John. I was going to go back to asking about how the move to Zero Trust maybe had CISA relook at things, but instead I'm going to ask about something else, because that last thing you said about the 853 effort is really interesting. And I think that's been one of the biggest challenges that I've seen over the years is matching up agencies' risk-based approach to 853. Can you just maybe give us a little more about what you're looking at, how that matching up is working, and where do the IGs fit into this conversation? Are they part of this discussion already? Are you going to present them something? What's kind of the longer term vision?
Yeah, I think that, Jason, that's a great question. I think that right now we're in the very early stages of how we're going to step through this. This was brought to our attention by a former colleague who's working back in one of the agencies, and as she was looking at how to support her Zero Trust project and make sure that the 853 and the risk management framework is supportive of that shift. She identified that there were some gaps in terms of like how you translate the zero trust capabilities to the various levels of security controls in the security baseline of 853. So, you know, we've talked about it with the Zero Trust Interagency Working Group under the Federal CIO Council, and we are talking with NIST about how we step through this. Once we kind of get a better understanding of what that delta really looks like, I definitely think that it's going to be extremely important for us to find an appropriate venue to bring the IG, the SIGI, you know, working group in and talk to them about how we deal with this. Because unfortunately, as we all know, the agencies, you know, when they hear the IG say something about how things are going with FISMA, they really pay attention. If we're in a position to help influence that in a positive way, it's absolutely critical that we do so.
All right, good to hear, because I think that's one of the mistakes I've seen over the years is something happens, no one tells the IG, and the IG dings you, and you're going, yeah, but, and then there's this kind of mismatch of discussion. So John, there's plenty more to talk there. We got our first poll answers, and very interesting when asked, what is your agency's biggest pain points? Where to begin is number one, and lacking skill sets is number two, with leadership buy-in and other is number three. We're not sure what that other is. Bill from Splunk, maybe you can fill in the gap. What is the other? You know, but what are you seeing from your clients? What's happening on Zero Trust that you're seeing across government?
Yeah, a couple of points I wanted to start with Jason here. You know, I heard this mentioned earlier, so technically I guess it's not new stuff for the audience like you asked, but it really bears repeating. You know, despite what you may hear, there is no single vendor that can sell a complete Zero Trust solution. That's because it's not a single technology. You know, it's a framework made up of interlocking technical and business architectures. So I think the best Zero Trust approaches you're going to see are going to be the ones that include those programmatic organizational changes, incorporating technology, policy, and even culture, as I think Shane Barney mentioned on the panel a little bit earlier. And for the federal government, it means there's going to be a challenge, I think, in working with many partners, both public and private. Obviously, John there at CISA, agencies that are further along, I think, in this Zero Trust process are going to partner with those that are getting started, exchanging that information, those playbooks, potentially even staff. And then on the funding side, those agency acquisition officers are going to need to really be closely knitted with the IT and security leadership to build out, and most importantly, sustain those Zero Trust capabilities, I think, going forward. And for us in industry, I think we're going to also have some challenges that we're seeing. Not only is it crucial for government and industry to partner closely like we're doing, but it's going to become increasingly important, I think, for vendors to begin working together to work collectively, you know, to help these agencies create a more seamless Zero Trust environment. You know, we as trusted vendors will need to play well together, and of course, our technologies are going to need to be tightly integrated. You know, I'm proud to say at Splunk we've already been doing this with a number of big vendor partners across the Zero Trust ecosystem. Another potential challenge, I think, for agencies that isn't talked about a lot is this cultural shift. This isn't something that I've heard too much about. There are a lot of aspects to Zero Trust that are, I think, probably come across counterintuitive to IT teams that have trained on decades of perimeter-oriented defense in-depth strategies. Zero Trust is going to require a change of mindset from defending that perimeter to still defending that perimeter, but also assuming breach and defending within. In other words, you're not only trying to keep the barbarians out of your castle, you're protecting the treasure from attackers who have already infiltrated. And this is a fundamental mind shift that's not going to be overcome overnight. On a positive note, I think there's a lot of Zero Trust where IT teams will be much more familiar. They've long been responsible for identifying the crown jewels or the HVAs. This is something John just mentioned with respect to OPM. The concept of Zero Trust, of course, and risk management relies heavily on knowing what matters and what doesn't, and you can't treat everything the same. And this will change depending on the agency's mission. Compliance, of course, can't be a peanut butter spread. Can't add the same compliance levels across the board. There just simply aren't enough resources. And then I'm sure we'll touch on this a little bit later, but really wanted to underscore the importance of, and what we're hearing from our agency partners around automation and the importance to zero trust strategy. It's all about speed. If users find zero trust cumbersome, if they find friction, if it's slow, they will find workarounds. That is human nature. But that, of course, undermines the fundamental goal of protecting around zero trust. But security and speed aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, and there, of course, are tools out there to assist. So looking forward to diving into those a little bit more, and looking forward to the discussion. Thanks a lot, Jason.
All right, well, while we dive into that a little more, we're going to go to our second poll question, and then I'll ask Bill, I'll ask you a follow-up when that poll question comes up.
Okay.
Just give it a second. There it is. All right. What guidance has your agency used to help understand and implement zero trust? So I think it's going to be all of the above. But Bill, here's the quick follow-up I have for you while folks are answering the question. Sure. Is we talk about the culture shift a lot, and I think it kind of gets it's both overplayed and underplayed when we talk technology. We always know it's a culture shift. It's never the technology. We've heard that. I don't know. I've been doing this 20 some years, so it feels like it's the same old, same old. Why is zero trust, or what has to happen to make zero trust that culture shift you want it to, or that you want to? What has to shift within the culture? Have you guys looked at it? Have you guys seen it? Has Splunk talked with their clients?
I think I heard Shane mention this earlier. I think in order to enact that kind of culture shift, and again, sort of decades of training on sort of protecting the perimeter, you're going to need leadership, and you're going to need sustained leadership on that. So making sure that it is not just an IT or a security issue, but that everyone is moving in concert with each other to implement this zero trust. I saw the poll earlier that said the toughest part about all of this is where to begin. That's an area where I think leadership and culture shift can all come into play. Some of the documents that CISA has put out, along with the OMB guidance, I think is absolutely essential in answering that question on where to start. I think it's a very, very practical guide. In particular, the zero trust maturity model. I think it's a fantastic document that really gives you that roadmap on how to start and what it looks like to have sort of an optimal state.
Our polls came in, no surprise. All of the above was the big winner of that one, so no surprise there. John, let me get you to weigh in a little bit on this culture change issue, because part of the reason why I think CISA has been very aggressive of getting these guidance out, these playbooks out, is to help move that culture. What are you seeing? How is CISA kind of trying to address that culture challenge?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that the culture, change that's out there right now is I think SolarWinds was really a big wake up call for everyone to see how far the adversary got into the infrastructure of a lot of agency cloud environments, a lot of private sector cloud environments. I think that just, even us in the cybersecurity realm, we're just like, it was a oh my God moment. And so I think that was an impeccable opportunity post SolarWinds for us to really look at what we've been doing for the past 20 years and looking at why it didn't succeed in terms of like that perimeter security architecture setting us up. We always talk about defense in depth, but I think we're also looking at this has been set out in the private sector as well, expense in depth. And I think we've got to really pare down, and this speaks directly to the culture and leadership. We've got to pare down what we're spending on IT and really focus on those things that matter and adjust the risk management approach in terms of like how we apply architecture and capabilities across the enterprise to support the varying degrees of risk that we can absorb or manage within a given agency network. And so I think that's like a huge part of what we need to continue to advocate for. But that's to me is a significant element of the culture.
Yeah. And Jason, just to, if I could add to that, John brought up SolarWinds, obviously huge driver of Zero Trust, and the cyber executive order that came out, obviously quite expansive, takes on a number of key security measures that I think had been suffering from inertia. Universal logging standards, multi-factor authentication, reliable asset inventories, ubiquitous encryption, all supporting this Zero Trust architecture. There's a lot of work out there, a lot of big challenges, obviously, for organization. But I think in this case, the administration was really leading. It had to go big. Incremental transformation just wasn't cutting it.
All right, we thank you both on that. We have some questions coming in from the audience, so let's get to them. And don't forget, audience, please continue to send in your questions. The first one comes from, and I may ruin their name, so my apologies, Nael. They write, if we have disparate legacy systems with separate login credentials and data structures, is there a case to grow it system by system, or is it often the case that if things don't support single sign-on, simply they need to be replaced to support Zero Trust? So they didn't say whether it's for Bill or John, but I'll let you both weigh on if you both understand it.
Sure. I can at least take a shot at this. This is kind of a pain point we hear in some way or another from our federal partners. How do we identify the assets, their trustworthiness across the ecosystem? So corralling these disparate technology tools that have built up over time, often legacy technology, and trying to understand what that data then is trying to tell the environment is a real challenge. And there's an ocean of information out there. Many organizations lack the visibility across the infrastructure and cloud components and the connected devices, to make these confident decisions that are so necessary in Zero Trust. When a piece of that tool chain is no longer producing data or not producing data correctly, defenders need to be aware, ensuring that the time to detect that outage and recover from it is crucial. So having that ability to monitor your Zero Trust environment is critical. And to do this properly, you need continuous monitoring, analytics that drive confidence in those decisions. In many ways, your nascent Zero Trust architecture is only going to be as good as your ability to monitor it and ensure its effectiveness.
Yeah, Jason, on my response to the question is yes, that legacy application or legacy system is ripe for modernization. Every agency has that mainframe sitting in the corner of the data center, continuing to blink lights, and as long as they're green and flashing, and no one's complaining, then it usually doesn't get attention. But I can tell you that, from my own experience at several agencies, that, that's not a good way to be proactive with cybersecurity. What we see with legacy systems and what we call technical debt is that, there's been a disconnect between that 3 to 5 year IT life cycle that's holistic to include the programming, planning, budgeting, and execution to make sure that those systems are properly maintained with current software and current code. I would suggest that in those cases, I think that speaks directly to what the TMF is for, and agencies should look at that as an opportunity to identify those significant and heavy lifts that are going to be expensive, to seed the money, to get the seed money rather, to modernize their environments, especially their application infrastructure.
Yeah. And we know several agencies have started that process. We know OPM, we know GSA, among two that come to mind that have started to kind of grab that TMF money or got approval for TMF money. Of course, John, as you know, there's more need than there is money. So there's got to be other ways, which is actually, I think, where CISA comes in too. And because I want to talk to you about that a little bit, because you mentioned earlier about how you had to maybe relook at the way, because of these 90-day and 60-day deliverables, how CISA is approaching the Zero Trust, security and moving security closer to data and support apps. How has CISA been changing and really been relooking at the way you provide services, or at least you help agencies over the last 3, 4, 5 months?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Jason. I think that we're still in the very early stages of that conversation. We know that, CDM was called out in the executive order that, we need to modernize and make sure that the program keeps pace with, not only cloud, but modern hosting environments. CDM's looking to, push out the EDR solution capability, within this next fiscal year, I believe. And, that's going to fundamentally change the way that program has operated, as a capability, a set of capabilities that are leaning forward. But I think we also have to have the conversation that really talks about that future state of how CISA is going to, not only pre-position capabilities through our programs and through the cyber QSMO, but also how we're going to change the way we interact with agencies in terms of the telemetry out of the cloud or the telemetry out of the data center, and how we pull all that together to provide analytic packages that will help us, be more proactive, in the space of threat hunting, and also working with agencies to solve some of those problems.
I remember writing a story when Zero Trust started to get big and how the pieces from CDM, from Einstein, from AIS, all these pieces are already there. And somebody's just got to start, kind of taking the puzzle pieces and bring them together. So and I think there's a lot of excitement, if you will, around CDM and the next set of capabilities that's coming. John.
Yeah, so two things on that. One, we are trying to look at that next revision of the Zero Trust maturity model to really bring that into focus, but also making sure that when we do that, that Zero Trust maturity model also is supportive of the cloud security technical reference architecture and the federal Zero Trust strategy. Because the one thing I get concerned about is that, one of the other legacy culture things is we always like to do things in the silo, right? And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us, and this I'm speaking more for CISA. We've got to pull this together so that it's a holistic view of what, CISA capabilities, CISA services, and what that operational model looks like, in a unified way. So I think that's our challenge, and something that we're working with our leadership on.
Bill, we got a question that comes in. It's not necessarily for you, but I'll throw it at you.
Sure.
Noah writes, curious if the panelists have thoughts on some of where the popular buzzwords like AI, automation, machine learning fit into the Zero Trust conversation. Bill, you mentioned automation already, but AI, machine learning, any other buzzwords we're missing here?
Yeah, no, I mean that covers quite a few that I've seen on the buzzword front. I'll say automation tools can play a tremendous role in Zero Trust. They can enforce those trust policies by automating the repetitive tasks and orchestrating workflows. They can assist in monitoring, managing disparate security systems through a single interface, and then orchestrate those remediations. And there's been a tremendous amount of innovation, some of them buzzwords, but in both government and private sector around the practical application of AI and machine learning, to really help organizations sift through those volumes, those growing volumes of data, to bring out just those relevant aspects across the hybrid infrastructure into one view, which is absolutely essential in a Zero Trust environment.
John, you want to just weigh in briefly? Obviously, automation, AI, machine learning, there's 101 other buzzwords. Anything that stands out to you is something that either CISA is really starting to looking at, or you think we will look at in the next 6-12 months?
Yeah, we definitely, through our CTO office, there's several initiatives on AI and machine learning. But I think that, looking at those concepts and how they support Zero Trust, looking at, how policy decision points and policy enforcement points are going to work to facilitate a lot of the Zero Trust, access, microsegmentation. I think that we've got a fair amount of work to do still to understand the attributes that are associated with those types of capabilities, to understand how we're going to facilitate that type of automation. Because I think we're still, I think we still have some time to understand how that's going to work in that bigger cybersecurity ecosystem.
Excellent. I see we're pushing up almost to 12:30, so we have just a minute or two left. To reminder to the audience, any last burning questions, please send them in right now. I'll get them on. Otherwise, you're going to miss your opportunity. In the meantime, John, Bill, let me ask you each one question. I mean, as we continue to talk about zero trust, what's the one I'll start with Bill. What's the one big pothole? What's the one big obstacle? Pick your analogy that you want agencies tend to fall in that they need to avoid.
Yeah, I think, again, it's one of the pain points we hear is, how do we identify our assets and their trustworthiness across the ecosystem? So corralling these disparate technology tools that have built up, over time. I think the advice I would give is to, essentially just take the first step, get started, take lessons from those agencies that may be a little bit further in their journey. Rely on those partners that really understand the ecosystem. Certainly that CISA has put out some incredible documentation here recently that can, I think, really show the next steps and how to begin.
All right, and then John, I'm going to ask you a similar question, but what should agencies and vendors expect from CISA in the next 6 or 12 months around zero trust? The maturity model 2.0 or whatever you're going to call it. What else?
Yeah, so definitely we'll be releasing an updated maturity model. We will be also releasing a new version of the cloud security technical reference architecture with additional use cases that we're looking at. But the expectation that we're setting for ourselves, especially at the technical worker bee level, is we're really looking at how we can dig a little deeper through these publications so that we're not just looking at the surface of the problem. My own opinion here is that as we start maturing our implementation guidance, especially in cloud and especially with zero trust, we've got to be able to demonstrate some depth of knowledge and how we can apply that knowledge through playbooks and working with our vendors to come up with mechanisms to help support automation of deploying these capabilities.
All right, we're a minute late, but I have one last question I was going to push through. I need less than 30 seconds from both of you. This is Steve asked a very, we'll call it important to Steve question, which is, if a company has a new award-winning technology that brings value to the identity and access management portion of zero trust, how do they get in front of your decision makers? So I'm sure other people have very similar questions. I'm going to give Steve just a little bit of a hard time, but Bill, with 30 seconds or less.
If it's important to Steve, it's important to me. I think that a lot of the innovation in this field is obviously coming out of the private sector. We are always looking for new and promising technology. Happy to pass Steve my information. I'm certainly not the decision maker around here, but maybe can put him in touch with someone.
And John, you get 30 seconds or less.
Yeah, so we definitely need to lean forward with these capabilities, especially in identity. One thing we run up against a lot is policy. That we're beholden to certain types of identity and access management approaches. But I would say that if there's a new technology out there that we definitely would like to hear about it. We have acquisition programs that can facilitate those discussions with the appropriate stakeholders within CISA.
All right, very good. I think I'm going to pass back over to Kirsten, and she's going to take it away. Panelists, John, Bill, virtual round of applause. Nice job as always. Appreciate your time. And Kirsten, thank you.
Thank you, Jason, John, and Bill. Up next, we're going to be hearing from another one of our partners, this time from the Senior Director of Enterprise Strategy, Jeff Richard. Enterprise Strategy at Veeam Government Solutions. Jeff, over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kirsten. I'm going to share a brief slide deck. We've got just a small amount of time to talk today. Is that coming through okay, Kirsten? Can you see that?
Yes, looks good.
Wonderful. Okay, so delighted to be here. I enjoyed that talk by John and Bill just now. Very insightful. We're hearing a lot about zero trust in the market these days, so it's always nice to get a little bit more clarity about it. I'm going to speak briefly about the Veeam Government Solutions Cyber Resiliency Platform and how that can fit in to your efforts to implement a resilient zero trust environment. Now, we've talked a lot already this morning about what zero trust means. I've just got a very simple definition that I'll use to structure the next 7 minutes or so when I'm talking with you. This is from NIST Special Pub 800-207, the Zero Trust Architecture, and it defines it just as an evolving set of cybersecurity paradigms that move defenses from static network-based perimeters to focus on users, assets, and resources. Talking with you about the Veeam Government Solutions solution for Zero Trust today, I'm going to go a little bit out of order, and I'm going to talk about assets and the kind of assets that the Veeam platform protects. And then we'll talk about our solutions around user restrictions and making sure that you don't overly trust admin users and end users in the environment, and the kind of resources that you need to think about when you're designing a data protection solution and making them resilient and zero trust focused. So for those of you that don't know Veeam, we are a leading enterprise backup solution. We've been the leader in virtual machine backup for probably over a dozen years at this point. But as you can see from this diagram, that has expanded to all of the major virtualization platforms, both on-prem and in the public cloud. We support Google, we support AWS and Azure, cloud native virtual machine backups. We also support very common and widely used SaaS, physical server platforms, and common enterprise applications. Now, to make sure that the people who you're trusting to protect that data don't stray further than they need to, that you're not blindly giving some number of folks in your organization admin credentials, and then if that credential gets compromised by an adversary on the network, all of your data can be compromised. Veeam has had very strict role-based access control and very granular permissions for many years. And that also applies to the automation tools that we build in our APIs and our various interfaces. It's possible to enable everything that you do with Veeam for multi-factor authentication. And what that lets you do, and what's really important for data management operations in particular nowadays, is that it lets you securely and confidently move data from on-prem to the cloud and back again, and make sure that if bad things happen, you're going to be keeping that data safe. So that's assets and users. I wanted to dig a little bit into resources, the third part of that zero trust definition that we just looked at, because there's one particular kind of resource that is under real threat in our environments these days. And we read about it in the news all the time. And that is, in fact, your backup infrastructure. The stats about all levels of government being affected by ransomware are pretty terrible. And there's not a lot of signs that that is going to get better before it gets worse. Gartner came out with a report in September called How to Protect Your Backup Systems from Ransomware Attacks. And they note a number of important steps to take, but I like the diagram, I like the graphic here because it points out the escalation of damage that a threat actor has on your network and in your infrastructure as time goes on. And in particular for your backup infrastructure, there's a couple of ways that that damage can manifest. First off, I need to be able to restore from my most recent unencrypted copy of my data. After, for example, a ransomware attack is set off and some of my data is compromised, I am going to have to turn back the clock to get the most recent unencrypted version of that. But I don't want to have to turn it back so far that no malware was on the server at the time that the attack happened, because likely, you guys have seen the stats for dwell times, the adversary's been on the network for months. So it's important that I have a mechanism in an automated way to restore the most recent unencrypted copy of my data, to protect that backup data from being encrypted itself by the threat actor, and to, on restore, remove malware from it. Veeam makes that easy with something that we call our Scale Out Backup Repository. That's what the SOBR acronym here stands for. And it's important to note that what the Scale Out Backup Repository enables is immutable, that is ransomware proof, unable to be tampered with backups at all levels of data protection, both on-prem data protection and if you make copies of your backup data into object-based storage, which, by the way, can also be on-prem or up in the hyperscale cloud providers, and it extends to low-cost archive tier storage. So we can make sure that if you've got backup data that you need to retain, you're going to keep it, and you're going to do that without relying on admin credentials never being compromised. We assume, as we've heard about today, sort of a state of constant breach, the idea that you can't just blindly trust that folks that are authorized on the network are doing what they should be doing because you might have been breached already. And so we've got a lot of safeguards, especially including immutable backups, to make sure that even in that situation, your data is going to remain safe. We also drive a lot of capabilities that follow from the NIST cybersecurity framework. We at Veeam adopted that early on. We realized a while ago that if you're in the backup business, you're in the security business. Don't have time to dig into that in a lot of detail today, but I will mention that we had a large government contractor who recently tested our hardened Linux repository, which we came out with in the last update of Veeam. They had a red team exercise against it where they tried to penetrate it. They tried to compromise admin credentials, even change the time on it, and they were unable to delete the backup data in the repository. They are subsequently recommending Veeam with our hardened Linux repository to their customers. And that number of customers is already pretty extensive. I'll just point out, Veeam has over 1,400 active federal customers right now. We've got a significant number of ATOs and are on numerous approved products lists. And if you'd like to know more, I would urge you to take a look at the veeamon.com conference that happened last month. It is 2 hours of content. It's available for free. So please check it out, learn more about Veeam Government Solutions and how we can help protect your data. Thanks. I'll turn it back to you, Kirsten.
Thank you, Jeff. That was excellent. And up next, we will be hearing from another partner of ours, the Regional Director and Solutions Engineering at HashiCorp, Tim Silk. Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thanks, everyone. It's great to be here today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm Tim Silk from HashiCorp, and I'm here today focused on in a zero trust context around secrets management specifically. And it's a very interesting topic in this environment because secrets management really builds upon what is the foundation of zero trust, and that is identity, which is often taken for granted. If we don't get identity right, all the encryption and network security and threat detection and visibility in the world won't help us. We need to know who, we need to know what, we need to know why someone or something is in our environment and what they are doing. So we know that, in fact, we have zero trust. A little bit about HashiCorp. We build tools for practitioners. We're a cloud infrastructure automation provider. All of our products and solutions were born in the open source community. There's a good chance that the engineers in your organization are using one or more of these tools already today. All of them have been used extensively across the Fortune 500 in public and private sector, across many, many different verticals, and have been downloaded millions and millions of times. And these tools really make up what the foundation of what we call the cloud operating model, which consists of 4 layers: infrastructure, security, network services, and application development. And we see across each layer specific capabilities that contribute to the deployment of applications and services. So if we look vertically across each of the providers on-prem or in the cloud, we see a complex, heterogeneous set of tools and capabilities, which really requires us to think about consolidating and simplifying down to really a single point of control across each of these layers. So for the infrastructure layer, it's infrastructure as code. The ability to codify the infrastructure and maintain it in a version control system, creating essentially an immutable infrastructure. For the network services layer, it's the services registry and the service mesh. And then at the application layer, it's the ability to develop applications from bare metal to the virtual machine environment to cloud native container development in a continuous integration, continuous delivery and deployment environment. Today, however, we're focused on that security layer, which, as I said before, as we move more towards zero trust, that point of control is identity. And in a zero trust environment, you trust nothing, you authenticate and authorize everything. Who are you? What can you do? What are you authorized to do? Why are you here? And frankly, what have you done? We want to know all those things in a zero trust environment. So at HashiCorp, we look at zero trust through really these four lenses: machine and human authentication, authorization to establish identity, and then machine to machine and human to machine access control. So as we establish identity, it gives us the ability to grant or revoke access to systems and services in our environment. So today I'll focus on that machine authentication authorization because secrets management is key here, and it's a challenge with many of our customers today. So what is a secret? It's anything that provides authentication and authorization or anything, frankly, that can be exploited. So application database credentials, system information, backup data, SSH keys, TLS certificates, cloud credentials as well, but also things like API endpoint locations, application configuration information, where information is stored or backed up, as Jeff had just talked about, where our logs are being sent. All of that is very sensitive information that needs to be protected. System information as well, memory and disk utilization to prevent, I want to prevent denial of service attacks. So we have many different types of systems and tools today that leverage these things we consider to be secrets in various forms in our environment. And the problem is they're stored everywhere. So we have what we call secret sprawl. We need management and control because otherwise we can't secure, we can't reduce risk, we can't operate efficiently, we can't leverage automation, which in today's cloud operating model with infrastructure, security, network services, application development, DevOps is front and center. And in a DevOps environment, we want to automate as much as we can. But without control over our secrets, our sensitive information, automation is just much, much harder to do. And once we get control of our secrets, we can actually change them. We can rotate them. We can dynamically change them, which further reduces our threat vector and makes the environment overall more secure. But again, we need control of our secrets in order to do that. So for HashiCorp, Vault is the solution of choice to manage secrets. And again, it's an open source tool that provides secrets management. There are enterprise versions of Vault as well as Vault as a service in the HashiCorp cloud platform. But its first role is that secrets management function. It also acts as a broker for identity. So it provides data encryption. So you can use Vault as an encryption service. It also provides advanced data protection across multi-cloud environments. Today, however, we're focused on that secrets management aspect of the tool. So how does it work? Vault provides a centralized control over secrets, over sensitive information, and access to that information by authenticating against trusted sources of identity, whether it's your on-prem Active Directory, your single sign-on provider, or any given cloud identity platform. So Vault acts as an identity broker in your environment. So you have a single place to go no matter what you need to authenticate to. So you just go to Vault and Vault takes care of the rest. Vault then also enables fine-grained authorization based on that identity and role, human or machine, again, by brokering access to secrets and keys. And so now we have control over all the identities and secrets in our environment because we have a centralized secrets management system that houses all sensitive credentials, keys, certificate, tokens, locations of sensitive data, backup data, et cetera. And with that control, we can now put a time to live on those secrets and again, provide dynamic credentials and decrease our threat vector across the whole environment. So I encourage you to read more about HashiCorp's approach to Zero Trust at the link on this slide. And you'll find more information about other aspects of HashiCorp's Zero Trust story, including console for machine-to-machine access and access control, and boundary for human-to-machine access control and privileged access management. That is my story for today. Thank you so much for your time. It was great to be here. Back to you, Kirsten.
Thank you, Tim. That was excellent. And next, we'll be hearing another panel discussion, this time moderated from FedScoop. We have Dave Neisser.
Hey, if everybody else in the panel wants to cam up. Perfect. Thank you, Kirsten. Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Nitchapir, and I'll be moderating the next panel on Zero Trust and Legacy Systems. Before we begin, I just want to remind everybody in the audience to submit your questions as we go to the Q&A section of the platform. We'll be going throughout the panel and addressing those. Please send them in. Also remember that the poll questions that we introduce throughout, there'll be 2 of them. Please answer those because that ensures that you get your CPE credits. I'll now introduce the 2 panelists. If you 2 could wave as I say your names. Jeffrey Lush, Chief Information Officer at the Air University within Air Education and Training Command at the U.S. Department of the Air Force, and Chris Kubik, CISO of Fidelis Security. So I'll start by flipping things over to Jeffrey. Both gentlemen are going to give 2 to 3 minute presentations. Jeffrey, if you'd like to start with your introduction into what's going on at your agency with Zero Trust and Legacy Systems.
So the Air University is first of all, perhaps we just start with what the Air University is. It's a large organization. We support around 350,000 students throughout the globe. It's both on campus. We have a campus in Ohio and one in Montgomery, Alabama. And of those 2 campuses, we graduate approximately 150,000 students a year. So we have on campus and off campus. We have about 13 different colleges with multiple programs within the colleges at the university. And so you can imagine from a networking perspective, and certainly from a managing the environment from an IT perspective, it can get pretty complex pretty quick. Our installation, as most, are separated with 2 different types of networks, 3 actually. 2 of which are secure networks, which are run primarily by the Air Force. And then we have an EDU network as well, which provides the connectivity for our colleges, basically, to do typical university type stuff. So we believe very strongly in this concept of zero trust from many different perspectives. We trust nobody. It's somewhat built into our DNA in the military. And even within our own environment, this has been a transitional time, and we'll talk about that during this discussion, but it's been a transitional time for a lot of users. As you begin to migrate them into cloud environments and more secure environments, they're really looking to have full administrative rights to everything, as they have in the past, and those days are over. And so we've implemented all different types of zero trust within our environment, down to kind of break the glass type of administrative access to the environment as well.
Now, Chris, maybe you can share a little bit about your industry perspectives.
Sure thing. So, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Very important topic. Prior to joining Fidelis, I spent 30 plus years in government service. So I certainly understand the challenges ahead of you guys in, kind of implementing zero trust across government systems, and particularly for the topic today, which is legacy systems, legacy networks, which, have their own set of challenges associated with them. And kind of looking back over the, the topics over the past 2 days, lots of different perspectives given on zero trust. But, I thought I'd just kind of give my own thoughts on kind of what I see are the key elements or key capabilities of zero trust, just so you kind of understand where I'm coming from. But, first of all, you need to have that kind of enterprise-wide visibility, understanding of the enterprise that you're trying to protect. I know Zero Trust is focused on kind of the, securing those individual transactions and implementing what I would call risk-aware access controls. But, without that enterprise-wide visibility, understanding of what your overall network looks like, it's very difficult to even roll out a Zero Trust strategy. So by having that visibility, that terrain mapping to really kind of show, help you understand where your data lives, particularly your critical data and your sensitive data that you want to protect with Zero Trust. How that data migrates through your enterprise, how exposed that data is to the internet and third parties, based on kind of where that data lives and how those, the assets that process and store that data is connected to the internet, and really also the kind of the specific risk for the individual assets that process and store that sensitive and critical data. So I think that enterprise-wide visibility is important. The second kind of key area, I think, is just having that continuous risk assessment of the assets and the users to enable you to make, once again, those risk-aware access control decisions. If you don't know the risk of the assets, it's really hard to, that's kind of a critical piece of Zero Trust and one of the key inputs to any type of access control decision. Is that asset appropriately patched and configured to be able to protect the data based on the data policies that I have in place associated with the data? Kind of third area is transactional monitoring. And the key here is Zero Trust moves away from kind of the perimeter, the enterprise perimeter, to much more of a transactional model. And so you really need to have monitoring that can, assess the cybersecurity of those individual transactions. So it means, needing to be able to decode those transactions across all ports and protocols from the network layer up to the application layer to really to be able to find any of those cyber threats that are lurking within the communications channel that could, kind of unravel your security once that initial access, is made. And then, kind of the next area is what I would call dynamic threat monitoring, which is really trying to use real-time threat intelligence, backed up with threat-based analytics and machine learning capabilities to really be able to detect and respond to the stealthy, sophisticated attacks that that the government needs to be concerned about. And the key here is to be able to detect those attacks, early enough in the attack lifecycle to be able to detect them and block them before significant damage is done. And then kind of the final area, which can be one of the more challenging areas, is just data governance. Really understanding, what are your critical data sets, understanding where they're located within your environment, and understanding what the appropriate protection policies are associated with those data. And for this, there's data loss prevention capabilities and other capabilities out there that can help you better implement and enforce policies around your data. And I already mentioned kind of the importance of enterprise-wide visibility for understanding where that data lives and how exposed it is the internet. So I kind of break it down to those kind of 5 key elements. And, when we're kind of working through adoption and implementation of Zero Trust in a legacy network, then it really helps to focus on these elements, to be able to move your legacy systems into a Zero Trust architecture.
So you listed these 5 areas, these elements. I'm curious, where do agencies start on this journey? Do they tackle all 5 at once? Do they dive in at number 1? Either you could start, or Jeffrey, maybe you can share how you guys started your journey.
Sure. So
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, from a practical perspective, the first place you have to start the journey is with leadership's buy-in. Without leadership behind you, these type of initiatives tend to sputter out. And in order to get that level of support, because that's where the money flows from, that's where all of that happens, and this takes money in most cases to do, replacement of equipment, things of that nature. But probably even kind of more foundational is to draw out what the functional requirement is that you want to achieve. So for us, we knew at the Air University that everything possible should be placed behind inside of Cloud One, which is the Air Force's public cloud. We knew that that would assist us in all kinds of cost savings related to ATO activities and all types of other efforts that we do to maintain legacy systems. Dropping it in there, absolutely critical. But where agencies, for the most part, where agencies struggle is the ability to draft out what success looks like. What are those functional requirements that you're trying to do, and then effectively communicate those, as I started, to leadership and to the stakeholders to get the appropriate funding and support in order to implement that change. Without those two core elements, there's a lot of spin in the wheels. You can adjust a few things here and there, but you really have to start with what is it that you truly want to do. Don't try to eat the whole apple at once. Take it one. This is not a destination, right? This is a journey. And as long as you look at it as a journey that is constantly changing, by the way, but it's a journey to make us better than we were yesterday, then you can drive some success out of the initiative.
Okay, yeah, and I would add to that. I mean, I absolutely agree with you. You know, that you definitely need that management buy-in, because it does require a significant amount of resources. It does require, you know, continued focus over many years to implement this. It's difficult to implement, so there has to be that follow through. Certainly, planning is key here, and I also completely agree. Don't try to eat the elephant all at once. So when you talk about kind of where to start, lots of different strategies out there. You know, some folks kind of focus on low-hanging fruit. You know, so they look at you know, maybe some systems where they've already moved into the cloud, where they've already adopted, you know, some third-party services that have zero trust capabilities or have you know, portions of zero trust capabilities, and really start to implement the features there to get some traction on zero trust. So, you know, if you're already using Office 365, you know, there's lots of great, you know, kind of data policy management driven types of capabilities within there. So enabling those and you know, starting to implement that is a good place to start. You know, other folks kind of focus more on where their greatest risk is. So they'll look at their most sensitive, their you know, most critical data sets, and they'll kind of you know, start kind of working it off on a data set by data set basis. But I think there's lots of different ways you could kind of tackle it, different ways you could carve it up. But you know, I think the key, as Jeffrey said, is don't try and eat the elephant all at once. Pick something small and kind of learn from it and expand things over time.
Now, what do you two see as some of the biggest technical challenges that agencies face with their legacy systems as they try and implement zero trust? And are there solutions out there that can help them address these problems?
Well, I can start first this time, since you jumped in last time. So, you know, I think, you know, since the topic of this session is kind of legacy systems, then, you know, I think that's the biggest challenge. You're talking, you know, systems that, you know, probably don't have any of the critical capabilities in them to support, you know, zero trust. So I think you've got kind of sort of an, you know, an additional bar to get over. You know, those systems, you know, may not be, you know, well supported anymore. And if you're really going to go down the path of trying to implement zero trust into a legacy system, then you know, you're really going to be taking on the role of the system integrator to build all the capabilities into your legacy applications and services. You know, other ways you can go about it is to essentially not try and implement zero trust within the legacy applications themselves, but essentially use it as an opportunity as part of your digital transformation to really kind of modernize those applications, and then, you know, implement zero trust kind of as you move those applications. You know, Jeffrey, you mentioned into the cloud. So certainly if you're moving things into the cloud, you know, it's probably a good opportunity to focus on those applications and implement zero trust there. You know, the key there is, if your cloud strategy is to kind of lift and shift your existing applications in the cloud, then you're kind of right back where you were of having to modify those legacy applications to support zero trust. If you're trying to modernize, move things in the cloud and implement zero trust, kind of all at once, you're probably really talking at really kind of redeveloping and redesigning those applications, and where you can leveraging third-party applications that, once again, as I mentioned, might already have a lot of the zero trust capabilities built into them.
Yeah, the reality is that some of the stuff is not going to move. And so you have to adjust, again, back to those functional requirements. That's where it becomes critical to have that conversation with whoever owns that function or that whoever lives on that application, right? That you can redefine what it is through manual process or some automated process so that you can start moving to an environment that would be supporting zero trust infrastructure. This is a real challenge when you're dealing with organizations that could have 20, 30, 40-year-old applications in some instance where it's just not possible. So the first place to start is to start, as has been mentioned, right, that low-hanging fruit. What's going to give me the fast and quick win? And then separate out the scope of when you begin to develop this out into short wins that you can quickly and easily market and advertise internally that you're making progress. One of the biggest problems with zero trust in federal agencies, having spoken with many peers of mine, is that they're trying to scope it so large that everybody is confused about what actually is being delivered. And when you get to that point, the projects almost always fail because nobody's feeling good about it, right? They're just seeing this year after year of dump of resources and money into something that's not doing anything for me, right? So you have to be able to find those things in your environment that will easily go, and the groups within your environment that are more cooperative, a little easier to work with, that won't raise a lot of churn in the environment, get them into zero trust and then market that internally. Yes, I'm good, and shift to the next project and do it very agile in today's development terms instead of that waterfall approach, which is kind of where a lot of agencies kind of sit at to do these type of initiatives.
No, I think
actually just a couple of add-ons to that. You brought up some really good points there, and once again, start small. I like the low-hanging fruit. I think that's a good place to start. But moving those legacy systems, into the cloud, kind of, as I said before, it kind of requires sometimes some redesign of that. But you mentioned there's some legacy systems that just, you're not going to move them into the cloud. They're going to stay there. So I think the key point there is, many agencies are going to be living in this hybrid world where they're not going to be fully in the cloud with all modernized zero trust, systems. You're going to have kind of a mix of different things. So, and you need to plan for kind of that transition, because you don't want to degrade your security while you're in this transition phase. So I think that needs to be accounted for as well. How are you going to live in this kind of hybrid world of kind of 1 foot in the zero trust camp and 1 foot not?
Now I want to remind folks that they can submit Q&A questions in our Q&A section. I think now we can flip over to one of our first poll questions here. In your opinion, how important is zero trust security to building cyber resilience? And the responses? All right, so far and away, very important. I'm curious though to get Jeffrey and Chris, your perspectives on how do you think that the cyber executive order that came out in May, how do you think did this shift your approach at all to zero trust? Did it make it more important, or was it already pretty high on the priority list?
Yeah, fortunately for the Air University, we were right in the middle of this huge migration of all of our legacy systems. So a couple mandates came out in 2021 and execution to be done in 2022 that were put everything in the cloud and implement zero trust. So we were, it was fortunate for us that we had already designed our systems to go there and got the buy-in from leadership and actually had it funded. So, you know, and it's not that easy for almost all the agencies. It just happened to be that the stars aligned for us. But so it hasn't really impacted us much. I think the biggest impact is the transformation of the culture that folks live in today for compute. And we're really kind of moving people to a new world, because zero trust, you know, I always envision zero trust like an automobile. I love to work on cars, and I have very old cars and very new cars. And in this example, I have a 63 Mini Cooper and a new Mini Cooper. Both of them Mini Coopers, you pop up the hood on each of them and they look completely different, right? On my old one, I can work on it. On the new one, I can't do much. Only certain rights are given to me to work on certain things in the environment to make it functional and operational. And that's really what zero trust is driving to, right? I don't want to give you like the 63 Mini where you could do anything to the car you wanted, right? I want to restrict that. You got to do some of the things, maintenance and things, but some of the big stuff leave to the big boys, right? That know what they're doing. And that's kind of where zero trust, that's the biggest challenge I think we have in the recent mandate and moving forward, is that culture within our environment, educating and converting those people over to this new way of doing things.
So I would say, at Fidelis, we support many federal customers, but we also support, large commercial companies, as well as we have a large international presence. And, zero trust is certainly not something that's new. It's been, the concepts have been around for many, many years. It's been talked about as a, up-and-coming technology for many years. But I think, we've seen a lot more interest in the commercial and the international kind of sectors of our customers asking about zero trust recently, and I think that's partially driven by the executive order. It's put a lot more focus on it, and so I think that's it's a good thing. It's the government's kind of driving things to some extent. I think the government's also been doing a really good job at putting out guidance, NSA guidance, CISA guidance, et cetera, on how to implement zero trust. And I think that's kind of what's been missing. It's been a conceptual thing. There's lots of, solutions out there that can help you to move to zero trust. But I think having that guidance in place and having the executive order really kind of mandated is really causing an uptick in people that are moving forward and implementing zero trust.
If we could get our second poll question up. How far along is your agency in its adoption and implementation of zero trust and legacy networks? And the responses? All right, so we've got a very mixed bag here, but it does look that like we've got an even split for the top choice between we are working on it and we are in the planning phase. Chris, is that what you're seeing from an industry when you're dealing with a lot of these agencies?
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty consistent. As I mentioned, we're getting a lot more inquiries from commercial and from our international, and most of them are really just trying to understand, I think they're kind of in this planning phase, trying to understand the capabilities that are out there that can help them to implement that. So I think that's pretty consistent.
And Jeffrey, what phase would you say your agency is in?
Well, from an Air University perspective, we're just at the beginning of it, right? So we would probably be, I don't know, maybe 25% of the way there. So we've got a long way to go.
Now we're closing in on time, but we do have an audience question I want to get to. How do you lead difficult actors to understand that the zero trust concepts to get buy-in? We have tried to roll out apps with zero trust capabilities on modern platforms, but people obsess about the security and reputation of legacy systems and intrinsically trust them.
So the thing that came to mind was try to explain the concept to a 10-year-old. And if the 10-year-old understands it, then you're good to go, right? And I'm not saying that leaders are 10-year-olds, but you need to make it as simple as humanly possible with clearly defined outcomes and clearly defined benefits to the agency. Without those clearly defined, it's very difficult to turn their heads. And you really have 2 minutes to do that in most cases, right? Because they're going to turn off almost immediately if you go too deep, too fast. So try it with a 10-year-old, clearly communicate your outcomes and what's in it for the leader. That combination seems to work pretty well for me.
And I would say that we have tons and tons of evidence to show that the attackers are getting more and more sophisticated. They're getting very good at using stealthy techniques, whether that's living off the land types of techniques where they're actually on your networks, moving laterally through your networks, with accounts for your users, so they kind of blend in with the user traffic. So no matter what you do to try and secure those legacy systems, you're still going to be you're still going to have a challenge trying to detect those kind of living off the land, more stealthy techniques across those legacy systems. So zero trust is all about trust but verify, and assume that folks aren't trusted, and really kind of locking things down, and also having a lot of more segmentation within your networks to really try and block that lateral movement. So those legacy systems without moving to zero trust are still going to be relatively easy for those attackers to be able to move laterally through those systems and compromise bigger portions of the network.
Well, that's a great point to end on. Jeffrey and Chris, I want to thank you both for your time. Thank you to the audience for tuning in. I'm going to flip it back over to Kirsten.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Jeffrey and Chris as well. Well, and thank you to our sponsors and our audience for tuning in today. We had some really excellent audience questions that sparked some really engaging conversations, so we appreciate it. I want to thank all of our partners at AppGate, Beyond Trust, Contrast Security, ForgeRock, Fortinet, ForcePoint, iBoss, Ivanti, Menlo Security, Rubrik, Netscope, Palo Alto, Trend Micro, and Vanafi for partnering with us. This wouldn't be possible without them. So thank you for everyone involved. And we really appreciate everyone who tuned in for this 2-day event. Here is an announcement. ATARC will be taking this next week off for the holidays, but we hope that you will join us for our next one on November 30th, which I see is posted on our screen. So that'll be the first one back. And looks like we've got a really incredible lineup. So definitely go register for that on our website, free to all, and tune in for that. And then lastly, I believe our poll was just posted. So if you like your CPE credit emailed to you, please notify the ATARC team. Otherwise, thanks again. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their week. Bye.